cold dusk settled over the Red Keep. The wind sighed along the high walls and circled the stony towers, like a tired sentinel, seeking warmth in every crevice. Torches stuttered in the courtyard, painting wavering shadows on the ancient walls, while the last slice of sun sank beneath the horizon. The once lively fortress seemed subdued, haunted by echoes of conflict and uneasy secrets. Under Cersei's rule, vigilance had become the currency of survival. Yet the tension in the air felt different tonight. Something was coiling in the quiet gloom. An undercurrent, a subtle shift of power stirring in the very stones. Within the Red Keep's heart lay the small council chamber, an austere room known to host the realm's greatest triumphs and darkest decisions. A circular table dominated the space, set with heavy chairs that had once held the likes of Tywin Lannister and Mace Tyrell. But this was a different time. Since assuming the throne, Cersei had slowly eroded the council's influence, leaving only those who would parrot her demands and mutter words of compliance. Even that dynamic was shifting, almost imperceptibly, as key figures exchanged hesitant glances. Torchlight cast flickering patterns against the walls, almost like trembling conspirators. At one end of the table sat Lord Ormond Ailes, Master of Coin. He was a shrewd man with thin gray hair combed carefully over a balding pate. His nose had the slight bend of a man once struck in the face, but his bearing was that of a dutiful banker who believed in figures more than fantasies. He shuffled into his seat now, fiddling with a parchment detailing the crown's latest debts. The war had bankrupted much of the treasury, and whispers of unrest filtered in each day from the corners of the Seven Kingdoms. Beside him was Sir Martin Moore, Master of Laws, a role rendered nearly obsolete under Cersei's fist. Though broad of shoulder, Sir Martin had grown subdued, even timid, throughout the Queen's harsh reign. He'd started to wonder about the consequences of their decisions, the moral toll mounting behind every command he followed. A faint line of worry marred his brow. Opposite these two men sat Lady Cersei, a minor noblewoman who had recently been named Mistress of Whispers. She had inherited the Spiders' network from Qyburn, or what remained of it. With Varys gone, Qyburn dead, and so many of the old intelligence channels upended, she relied on cunning and careful observation. She watched everything, listened to everyone, yet wore a neutral face. Her short auburn hair framed clever eyes that missed no detail. In the cloak of evening, even the slightest shift in posture or tone caught her notice. A single candle illuminated the chamber's center, revealing their features but offering more shadow than comfort. No one spoke. The hush stretched. The flame guttered. Finally, it was Ormond who broke the silence, clearing his throat softly. "The gold's gone," he said in a hushed voice, though no one but the three of them sat in the room. "At this rate, we'll not afford the grain shipments for the city, let alone pay back the Iron Bank or any other lenders. Come next harvest, King's Landing will starve. You both know that. Or do you think Her Grace can conjure coin from the skies?" Nanner Fendal. A dryness undercut his last remark. Once he might have been terrified to speak of the Queen so casually, so critically. Yet they were alone, or so they thought. Sir Martin offered a helpless shrug. "I keep telling the Queen to impose new taxes. She wants them higher and steeper each time. The city will riot if we press them any harder. A hungry man will look to blame someone for his empty bowl." Ormond's face darkened. "The houses that once pledged fealty to the Queen resent her. Our alliances have whittled down to near nothing. If she continues along this path..." He left the thought unfinished, but the tension in the room pointed toward the same stark conclusion. Chaos was on the horizon. Lady Sissel's gaze flicked toward the door, ensuring it was shut tight. "Even so," her voice came as a near whisper, "you both know what must happen." She did not elaborate, giving them a moment to absorb the implications. Sir Martin gave a small shake of his head, as though ridding himself of a dangerous notion. "I won't speak of treason lightly." Yet, even as he uttered the words, his eyes betrayed the flicker of a question. How far could they let the Queen lead them all into ruin? Ormond's fingertips drummed on the table. The flicker of candlelight revealed the sweat gathering at his temple. He swallowed before speaking. "None of us can carry this realm alone. We barely function as a council, and there's no consensus among the lords, the queens. temper makes bridging alliances near impossible." He paused, leaning forward. "One cannot rule with fear alone forever, you know. Fear turns to hatred, and hatred to vengeance. If the lords think she's unfit, they might do something rash." "Then?" Lady Sissel's gaze darted from Ormond to Sir Martin, then back. "The lords have already begun whispering. I have it on good authority that storm lords, river lords, even the Vale might be entertaining the notion of independence. They feel no loyalty to a Lannister queen." She took a measured breath, careful. "Many of them speak the name Baratheon still. Robert's memory lingers. A bull sigil, proud and strong. In hushed corners, they recall the resilience of the old line." "House Baratheon is gone," Sir Martin said. "Stannis is dead. Renly is dead. Robert's trueborn heirs are no more." His eyes shifted uncertainly. "There are rumors that Gendry still lives, yes. I remember hearing something about him being legitimized briefly or recognized by the Targaryen queen before her end, but no official decree ever reached the crown." Lady Sissel offered a half-smile that did not reach her eyes. "Rumors dot to me. An orphan in Flea Bottom. A blacksmith. That's the story, is it not? We should not discount rumors entirely, Sir Martin. Especially not the ones people whisper with hope." She paused, letting the idea hang in the musty chamber. "Or with despair." Silence reigned once more, as though the stones themselves were listening. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the narrow windows, bringing the night chill into the castle's corridors. Inside, the air felt too tight. Each occupant of the small council chamber was acutely aware that to speak further could be a step that changed their lives forever. But the hunger for survival was strong. A sense of possibility took root. Sir Martin closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, resolve flickered there. "The city is on a knife's edge. We stand no chance against another rebellion. Not after the destruction caused in the war with the dead, the battles for the throne. If the small folk believe the queen is unfit, if the lords rally behind someone else." He trailed off. Ormond inhaled. "We tread dangerously close to treason if we so much as utter a plan." "Lady Sissel, do you speak for us all if you speak at all?" She nodded, faint and deliberate. "We can serve the realm if we move carefully. If Gendry is indeed alive, and if the realm sees him as a rightful heir, that name might unite the disillusioned. The Gold Cloaks might prefer Baratheon blood to Lannister tyranny. It could end the conflict before it begins. But we must be sure that this is not another doomed plot. We must be certain Gendry can lead, or can at least stand as a symbol for the lords to rally behind." Nander. A heavy quiet followed, each conspirator sinking into their own thoughts. All of them recognized that they walked a deadly path. If Cersei even suspected the nature of their conversation, they would lose their heads within the day. Yet if they did nothing, the realm would starve, the people would riot, and eventually someone else, someone more bloodthirsty, would strike them down in the name of justice or vengeance. Eventually Sir Martin murmured, "I've heard whispers from the Gold Cloaks. Many of them think Gendry would be an acceptable figure, but how would we find him? Would he even want the throne?" Lady Sissel closed her eyes, her expression flickering through uncertainty and purpose. "I have ways." Then she pressed her lips tight. "If we do this, we must do it quietly. There can be no margin for error. There are watchers everywhere, not just mine. The Queen has eyes too." The candle guttered, sending the chamber into sudden half-darkness. Outside, a distant footstep alerted them that a guard might be passing. As one, they leaned back, adopting the neutral expressions expected of them under the Queen's rule. The guard's boots paused near the door, but soon continued down the corridor. Breath eased from each chest, an unspoken tension. Then Ormond rose, rolling the parchment in his hands. "We've spent enough time here tonight. Her Grace wonders if we tarry too long. Remember, we spoke only of coin, a trifling matter, understood?" Sir Martin stood as well, discreetly adjusting his sword belt. "A trifling matter indeed." Lady Sissel offered a final parting glance, her voice barely above a breath. We are speaking only of coin, she echoed. Go, before suspicion grows. Then she doused the candle with a quick pinch of her fingertips, plunging the chamber into darkness. They left, each returning to private chambers or patrols, carrying the weight of an unformed rebellion in their hearts. Nassel, in a cramped lodging by the waterside. Gendry stared into a basin of still water, the reflection revealing a furrowed brow and weary eyes. The life of a blacksmith had returned to him after the upheavals of war. He had never aspired to rule, never even dreamed that he might be anything more than a nameless bastard. Those fleeting days of galloping across the countryside with Arya Stark had felt like a life half remembered, a thread of sunlit memory in an otherwise gray tapestry. He'd been foraging for a local shipwright these last few weeks. The pay was meager, but it provided lodging and enough coin to keep his belly from grumbling. The nights were long and cold down by the docks, and the dream of forging mighty weapons in a palace smithy had grown distant. He'd taken a risk returning to King's Landing at all, but something had drawn him back. Perhaps the memory of the forge in the city's labyrinthine streets, the echoes of his earliest apprenticeship, or maybe a private desire to learn what fate had befallen the kingdom. He'd heard rumors of the Queen's cruelty, the city's unrest, but he kept his head down, just another face among the throng. He dried his hands on a rag, wincing at the burn mark that ran across his forearm. It was fresh from an accident at the forge that morning, when a stray spark had leapt from molten metal. He was used to pain, used to forging, used to being alone in his thoughts. Leaning against the rickety table, he rubbed at his temples. The day's work had exhausted him, and the swirling uncertainties of the city weighed heavily on his mind. He had glimpsed columns of Lannister soldiers patrolling the streets with harsh vigilance, had heard shopkeepers grumble behind half-closed doors. Something was wrong in King's Landing. The air was thick with the smell of fear, or perhaps with the inevitability of change. He heard a sound outside his door, a careful scuff of boots. Normally he might ignore it, but tonight it seemed too deliberate. Cautiously he eased a hand toward a hammer lying on the table. Then came a soft rapping on the timbers. Gendry hesitated. No one visited him here. This was a lonely corner of the docks, where sailors rarely strayed, and he had few acquaintances. He tightened his grip on the hammer. "Yes?" he called, voice steady. "Shipwright business," came a woman's voice, subdued but certain. He frowned, glancing at the meager lamplight in the corner. The old shipwright who employed him never came by personally, and certainly not at this hour. But it might be a messenger. Could be trouble as well. Gendry stepped forward and lifted the iron latch. He cracked the door open enough to peer outside. The alley was dim, illuminated only by a fading lantern mounted on the far wall. A slender woman with short auburn hair and calculating gray eyes stood there, wrapped in a cloak. He recognized her from somewhere, but couldn't place it. "My business is private," she said softly. "Might I come in?" He studied her, uncertain. Something about her bearing said she wasn't from the docks. The cloak itself looked of higher quality than anything a shipwright's messenger would wear. Still, he stepped aside to let her in, though he kept the hammer in hand, resting at his side. She moved with careful grace, ensuring the door was latched behind her. Then she offered the faintest bow of her head, as if acknowledging his caution. "I'll not waste time," she began, scanning the small space with an assessing gaze. "Are you Gendry Waters?" She paused, then corrected herself. "Gendry Baratheon, if you prefer." He froze. He'd never heard himself called that, not even when he'd briefly thought about what it might mean to be legitimized. That moment had passed in a swirl of war and shifting allegiances. He felt a prickle of unease along his spine. "Who are you?" She slid a folded parchment from her belt, though she did not hand it over immediately. "A friend, if you'll have one. My name is Sissel. I serve the interests of the realm. I suspect you do as well, whether you know it or not." Gendry's jaw tightened. "I serve my forge and my wage. That's enough trouble for me already." What then?" A faint smile touched her lips. "If that were truly the case, I'd not have found you. Your name is spoken among the people you know. Many recall your father's reign with, perhaps not fondness, but with a certain pride. Robert Baratheon was a large presence, if nothing else. And the storms that swirl now make people yearn for simpler times. They speak of the bastards who might still carry that black hair and broad shoulder. He took a step back, pressing against the wooden table. He didn't want to revisit any illusions of a grand destiny. He wasn't Robert Baratheon's heir in truth, not in spirit. He was just Gendry, and that was complicated enough. Stories don't feed the hungry. Or did you have another purpose tonight? Her gaze flicked to the hammer in his hand. She remained calm. I come on behalf of certain concerned parties who wonder if the realm might need you. Our queen sits on a precarious throne. She has debts she cannot pay, alliances that crumble by the day. The people suffer. The lords question her every move. And you, Gendry, might... I want nothing to do with that, he cut in, voice rough. Why do you think I left the city? Why do you think I never claimed anything my father left behind? I don't want to rule. I'm no king. Leave me be. Sissel inclined her head in acknowledgement, but she did not relent. I can't force you, of course. But let me speak plainly. There are powerful lords and ladies who intend to see the queen's ruin. They are gathering. They want a Baratheon figurehead. If you do not step forward, someone else might fill the vacuum. Someone without your blood or your integrity. Cersei's reign is built on fear and gold. The gold is nearly gone. Fear alone may not hold much longer. The realm risks plunging into a new cycle of war and chaos unless there is a rallying point everyone can accept. Your father's name may carry that acceptance, especially if you can show yourself to be more than his faults. Gendry's knuckles whitened on the hammer handle. He thought of the smoldering ruins he'd seen in the Riverlands after the war, the orphans, the hungry. He thought of Davos Seaworth, who had once risked a great deal to help him escape Dragonstone and survive. He thought of how fleeting peace had been after the wars that ravaged the realm. So you want me to stand up and say, I'm Robert Baratheon's son, follow me. That's your plan. There's much more to it, she admitted softly. None of which can be accomplished by brute force or rushed proclamations. It must be subtle. We must gather supporters quietly. If we succeed, the realm might be spared bloodshed. The lords would kneel to you if we arrange it properly. Cersei, she, would be deposed, perhaps exiled, if that can be done without more violence. Or else she may fight, and that will be a more dangerous path. He turned away, setting the hammer on the table, and stared at the flickering lamp. The flame danced inside its glass enclosure, wavering in the faint draft from beneath the door. The entire notion felt surreal. He remembered forging swords in the bowels of a smithy as a child, no name beyond the casual nicknames shouted by the other apprentices. Gendry passed the hammer. Gendry stoked the coals. That had been his life. And now, here was this woman, calmly describing an uprising against the queen, with him at its center. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the weight in her eyes warned him that this was real. Sissel moved a step closer, close enough that he caught a hint of some faint perfume or maybe just the lingering smell of parchment on her clothes. I'm well aware of how daunting this must sound, but think on it. If you refuse, if you remain in obscurity, there are those who will see you as a threat regardless. The queen, if she discovers your presence, will have you killed or imprisoned. Other rebellious lords might see you as a missed opportunity and might resent you for not stepping forward. Hiding is no longer safe. The best way to stay alive in these times may be to claim your birthright. Otherwise, you risk being a pawn in someone else's game. She let the words settle. Outside, the hush of the city's darkness wreathed the cramped room like a silent storm. Then, with no further attempt to push him, Sissel reached into her cloak and retrieved a small cloth pouch. She set it on the table. It clinked softly with the unmistakable sound of coin. There's enough gold there to tide you over for a few weeks. Use it for a better room, for supplies, whatever you need. There's a smithy in the outskirts, near the dragon pit. The owner there is loyal to me. If you have questions, if you decide to step forward, meet me there in 3 days' time, after sundown. It's your choice. Cersei. He looked at the pouch, not daring to touch it. And if I decide not to, she exhaled, her eyes trailing over his face as though committing it to memory. Then I suggest you leave King's Landing under the cover of darkness. Find somewhere distant, as far from the Queen's reach as you can, and pray the Lords don't decide to drag you into their conflict anyway. A moment of silence passed, each of them aware how precarious and complicated this exchange had become. Then Sissel dipped her head politely. I'll take my leave. She moved toward the door, pausing only briefly. Think carefully, Gendry. The realm stands at the edge of a knife. And with that, she was gone, footsteps echoing down the narrow walkway outside. Gendry stood there for a long time, unmoving, the gold-laden pouch on the table tempting him with its weight of unasked-for responsibilities. His mind churned. The city's gloom pressed against the shutters. He swallowed hard and closed his eyes, remembering storms, remembering the forging of steel, the clanging of hammer upon anvil. That was his life. And yet, he couldn't shake the persistent chord of possibility humming in his chest. Perhaps, in the darkest hours of the realm, even a bastard might shape history. No. Dawn came sluggishly. The first pale rays touched the spires of the Red Keep, painting them in muted gold. In her private chambers, Cersei Lannister sat on the edge of her bed, still dressed in the black robe she wore at night. Sleep had not come easily. She had a new habit in the early mornings, scanning the horizon for signs of dragons, though they were presumably gone. Old habits died hard, especially in a city that had burned more than once. She rose, crossing to the window. The curtains were heavy, embroidered with the golden lion of House Lannister. She parted them and looked down over the courtyard. A handful of Lannister's soldiers marched in formation, their halberds catching the morning sun. Beyond the walls, the city stirred, an uneasy beast waking to face another day of scrounging for bread and water. Though the silent vantage gave her a semblance of calm, an undercurrent of suspicion gnawed at her. She knew many on the small council were weak-willed and easily spooked. She had seen the glances they exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. It had been months since the final battle in the capital. She recalled that day with a blend of horror, fury, and satisfaction. The Targaryen queen had threatened her city, her throne, and had perished in the end. The rumble of collapsing walls still reverberated in Cersei's memory at times, especially when she closed her eyes. She thought she had escaped certain death through cunning and sheer will, only to emerge as a queen over ashes. But she was alive, and that was enough. Jaime was gone, lost in the rubble of their final stand together. She sometimes refused to remember exactly how. Grief threatened to crack her composure, but she had learned to lock it away behind a steel wall of bitterness. A distant knock sounded at her door, rousing her from recollection. She turned, a sneer curling her lip. It was early. She expected no visitors. Enter, she barked. The door opened to reveal one of her handmaidens, a quiet girl with wide eyes. She trembled, always on the edge of fear, which pleased Cersei in a dark way. My queen, the girl said softly. Your small council is convening this morning to discuss various matters. Will you attend? Cersei lifted her chin. I will. But let them wait. Have them send up my breakfast. I'll arrive in my own time. The handmaiden bowed awkwardly, stepping back as though from a viper coiled to strike. In the corridor behind her, Cersei spotted two more attendants with trays of fruit, bread, and wine. She motioned them forward. The enticing scent of fresh bread mingled with the dryness of the morning air. Without a word, she allowed them to set the tray on a small table. Then, with a dismissive wave, she sent all of them away. She sipped her wine in deliberate silence, letting the rich tang fill her mouth. She reminded herself of her power. She was queen of the Seven Kingdoms, what remained of them at least. Yet the days were fraught with rumors, whispers of disloyalty from the Stormlands, the Reach, even the Westerlands. A Baratheon bastard had once been rumored to exist, but that was old gossip. She'd thought him long dead or vanished. Still, she felt the old worry gnaw at her when she recalled how easily people latched onto any shred of hope. People needed symbols, and House Baratheon had been a symbol once. Targaryens were gone. Lannisters were hated. Perhaps she was being paranoid, but better paranoid than dethroned. She crushed a grape between her teeth, the burst of flavor mingling with the slight bitterness of her thoughts. Let them conspire, if they dared. She would stamp out rebellion as she always had. She would rule with an iron fist and a cunning mind. If her small council was planning something, she would discover it soon enough. She finished her wine and grabbed a black gown from her wardrobe, laced with gold thread at the sleeves. She stared at her reflection in the polished metal mirror. Pale face, green eyes that flickered with suppressed rage, hair shorn short. She had aged, yes, but she carried herself with the pride of a lioness. She would not go down quietly. Dressing quickly, she slipped on rings of gold, anointing her fingers with the gleaming symbol of her house. Then she strode out, the echo of her boots trailing down the corridors. Guards snapped to attention, uncertain. Staff bowed, trembling. The queen was in one of her moods, the kind that could lead to heads rolling if someone crossed her. She relished the slight quiver of fear in their posture. Fear was how she survived. Fear was her weapon and her shield. She entered the small council chamber, which had been softly abuzz with conversation. Immediately, the room hushed. Ormond Ailes, Sir Martin Moore, and Lady Cecil Cersei all stood at attention, heads inclined. Cersei took her seat at the head of the table, letting her gaze sweep over them. She wondered idly which of them had the seeds of treason in their hearts. "Speak," she commanded. "What is so urgent that you drag me here at daybreak?" They exchanged glances, as though urging one another to lead. Finally, Ormond cleared his throat. "My queen, it's the matter of the harvest. We have concerns that the expected shipments from the Reach may be delayed. If the city's granaries run low, then we tax the rest, do we not?" Cersei interjected. "That's what we've done in the past. What's changed?" Ormond shifted. "Yes, my queen, but it's not so simple. House Hightower's regents have been aloof. Our envoys report that negotiations are stalling. They claim the crown still owes a substantial sum from last year's shipments. They're reluctant to extend further credit." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "Then find someone else to pay them. Or do you expect me to conjure gold from the bedrock?" "No." Sir Martin bowed his head. "We're already imposing heavy taxes on the city. The small folk are struggling, and the tension grows daily." Cersei rose abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping across the floor. The jarring sound made everyone flinch. She placed her palms flat on the table, leaning forward. "Then find a solution," she spat. "Sell Lannister properties if you must. I will not be starved into submission by these lesser lords. The crown rules over them, not the other way around." Lady Cecil's expression remained neutral. "Your Grace, perhaps we should approach the lords more diplomatically. Show them we value their partnership, rather than remind them of diplomacy, you say?" Cersei's lip curled. "We tried that with the Tyrells, and look where that got us. Our gardens in ashes, the High Garden seat up for grabs. No. They must learn we will not bend. If they want their payments, they must deliver first. Do you understand?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Lady Cecil's features before her face became unreadable again. "As you command, Your Grace." Cersei let the silence loom, watching them squirm. She sensed their resentment. She turned to Ormond, as if awarding him the final bit of her wrath. "Master of Coin, you will find a way to pay these debts. Speak with the Iron Bank if you have to. Promise them the gold of Casterly Rock. Whatever it takes, but do it quietly. I do not want rumors of our finances circulating through the streets." Ormond bowed his head, though a telltale tightness in his jaw revealed the stress he felt. "Yes, Your Grace." She straightened, adjusting the golden trim of her gown. "I trust you all know your duties. I do not wish to be summoned again for trivialities. Now go. I have other matters to attend to." "Nadastuo." Without waiting for their response, she swept out of the chamber, the train of her gown trailing behind. Her footsteps receded, leaving the three council members to exchange glances of exasperation and unspoken concern. The hush was broken only by Ormond's heavy sigh. Lady Cecil pressed her lips together, expression pensive. Sir Martin's hand trembled slightly on the hilt of his sword. as though itching to do something but lacking the courage. "It is as we feared," Lady Sissel said quietly. "She will push them until someone pushes back. She's mad," Sir Martin muttered. "Or close enough. How long until the city erupts?" Ormond ran a hand over his thinning hair. "I trust we have a plan. We must move swiftly. But carefully." Lady Sissel nodded once. "I spoke to him. He is hesitant, not entirely opposed, yet not convinced. We have 3 days to glean his decision. If we cannot bring him in willingly, we must consider other approaches." A grim look passed among them. They knew the stakes, and they knew the Queen would not hesitate to have them all beheaded if their designs came to light prematurely. The oath they shared now was not one of loyalty to Cersei, but loyalty to a realm that teetered on a desperate edge. That very afternoon, in a small yard near the docks, Gendry hammered a horseshoe for a local stable hand. Sweat trickled down his temples, and the muscles in his arms ached. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal usually soothed him, but not today. His mind was a swirl of indecision. Sissel's words had taken root, burrowing into his thoughts. The memory of her unwavering gaze refused to leave him. Every time he pounded the hot iron on the anvil, he saw fleeting flashes of what might happen if he said yes to her plan, or if he said no. He finished shaping the horseshoe, plunging it into a barrel of water with a hiss of steam. The stable hand waited, half distracted by the bustle of the street. Gendry fished out the cooled piece of iron, wiping it down quickly before handing it over. The stable hand mumbled a thank you and pressed a copper into Gendry's palm. Not enough for the labor, but the man didn't have more to spare, and Gendry was too distracted to argue. He slipped the coin into a pouch at his belt. Sighing, he glanced across the busy waterfront. Ships drifted in and out of the harbor. Gulls circled overhead. Sailors barked orders as cargo was unloaded and reloaded. The noise of the city was a constant hum. Vendors hawking their wares, children shouting, dogs barking. In the distance, the Red Keep towered like a crimson menace, perched upon the bluff, lording over the masses. That fortress had once been a place he never dared enter willingly unless forced. He remembered forging armor there at the command of the Lannisters. They never treated him like a person. He was an instrument, a tool to be used and discarded. Across the way, a group of gold cloaks strode by, their eyes roving the docks. Gendry tensed, mindful that any of them might recognize him. His face had changed since his days as a wide-eyed apprentice, but not so much that a careful observer couldn't detect something familiar. He turned back to the anvil, pretending to examine the shape of a new piece of iron. The gold cloaks passed without incident, and Gendry exhaled. Hiding in plain sight had worked so far. But for how long? He couldn't forget Sissel's warning. If the Queen discovered him, she'd see him as a threat, someone who could rally the realm to oust her. That alone might sign his death warrant. On the other hand, if he went through with Sissel's plan, was that any less dangerous? Being a figurehead for a rebellion was hardly a safer path. He'd be painting a target on his own back, challenging the most ruthless monarch the city had ever known. Yet at least that path offered a chance to do something meaningful. He saw how the people suffered, how tension coiled in every alley. He thought of Arya, recalling the memory of her confidence and ferocity. She would have told him to stop cowering, to fight for something. She always acted with a directness he admired, even if it scared him. The mental echo of her voice taunted him. "You're more than you think you are. Stop whining and pick up your hammer." He grunted, shoving the memory aside. She was gone, vanished into the north, or beyond. This was his choice, his alone. The stable hand left, and Gendry found himself with no immediate tasks. His arms and shoulders ached, but his mind refused rest. He pulled out the small pouch Sissel had given him, slipping his thumb inside to feel the coins. Several silvers, maybe a gold dragon at the bottom. Enough to buy a decent meal, or a night or two in a real bed, as she had suggested. Perhaps also enough to buy passage out of the city, if he chose to flee. He stood there weighing the possibilities. Time passed in slow, agonizing minutes. Eventually, he looked toward the bluff again, at that looming Red Keep. The setting sun lit the towers in warm reds and oranges, but the sight only chilled him. Something stirred in him. A trace of pride, or maybe anger, at how the city continued to suffer under the Lannisters' grip. If Sissel told even a fraction of the truth, the realm needed a leader, or at least a rallying cry that wasn't born of fear. He turned, setting the anvil aside. Tomorrow, or the next day, he could head for the outskirts near the dragon pit. 3 days, she had said. The thought gave him a burst of uneasy energy. If he was going to do this, he wanted to do it on his own terms. He resolved to gather whatever belongings he had, maybe rent a cart from a friendly local. He wouldn't move immediately. He would be careful, watch for any sign of a tail. A swirl of dust rose as he stepped from the yard, letting the clamor of the docks envelop him. He glanced over his shoulder at the ragged building he'd called home these past weeks. Just a few planks stacked together. Hardly worth calling a smithy. Could he really leave this meager life to gamble on a grand destiny he never wanted? The city's stench of sewage, salt, and sweat burned in his nostrils. Yet beneath that, he sensed something intangible, an air of urgency. The entire capital was like a tinderbox, waiting for the slightest spark. And he, ironically, might be that spark. Bastard or no, blacksmith or no, Robert Baratheon's blood ran in his veins. And that meant something to enough people that it could tilt the fate of kingdoms. Slowly, Gendry began to walk away from the waterfront, headed deeper into the city. The day's final light glinted on his sweating brow, and a sense of inexorable change followed him down the narrow streets. He would gather his possessions, think everything through, maybe find a quiet corner to quell the tumult in his mind. But he already sensed that the calm monotony of the forge was behind him. One way or another, the path ahead would lead him into the storm. Meanwhile, that evening, Lady Sissel returned to her personal suite in the Red Keep, modestly appointed despite her station as Mistress of Whispers. She kept the furnishings sparse, with only a small chest for clothing, a plain bed, and a large locked trunk that housed her more sensitive materials. A single candle flickered on a table by the window. She was careful never to draw too much attention to herself. Subtlety was a weapon as potent as any sword. She removed her cloak, draping it over a simple wooden chair. Her eyes were tired, shoulders tight with the strain of subterfuge. This was a dance with dragons, dangerous, intricate, possibly fatal. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret her choices. Cersei's madness would ruin them all eventually, and Sissel refused to watch the kingdom descend into anarchy again, without at least attempting to steer events. Crossing to the trunk, she knelt and fiddled with a hidden mechanism near the hinges, releasing a secret compartment. Within lay several pieces of parchment, each detailing whispered reports from across the 7 kingdoms. She read them methodically, lips pursed. Trouble in the Westerlands as a once loyal bannerman refused tribute. Discontent brewing in the Crownlands as harvests fell short. Murmurings of insurgents in the Stormlands, loyal to a rumored Baratheon revival. Some of these might be nothing more than idle chatter, but many of them chimed with what she already suspected. The realm was unraveling. She set the parchments aside and withdrew another sealed note. This one from Ormond, delivered discreetly to her hand during a brief moment in the corridor. She broke the wax seal and scanned his hurried script. It was a coded message referencing financial shortfalls, but Sissel understood the subtext. Money would be made available to support the new project, as they were calling it in code. The small council had begun funneling coin to safe houses in the city, hoping to rally enough sympathetic souls to their cause. If Gendry agreed to meet them, they'd be able to keep him hidden, tutor him in the basics of courtly manners, and quietly reach out to key houses. She sighed. This was the risky part. Rebellion was easier to whisper about than to carry out. They needed to align with the Gold Cloaks, or at least a significant fraction of them, to avoid a bloodbath in the streets. They needed to buy the favor of certain lords with promises of debt, relief, or trade benefits. They needed to neutralize Cersei's loyalists in the capital, or lure them away. The entire plan was a precarious tower of stacked assumptions. But what alternative did they have? Setting the note aside, Sissel let her shoulders sag. The candle flame quivered, casting elongated shadows. She thought of Gendry, how uncertain he looked. He wasn't like Robert, who was loud and brash, a man forged in battle. Gendry was quieter, more cautious, maybe even kinder than his father ever was. That might work to his advantage if he could muster the confidence to lead. But would it be enough to quell the storm that was coming? Night deepened, and she rose, locking the trunk once more with deft precision. She couldn't know the answers yet. The next few days would determine their course. Perhaps the realm's fate hinged on the decision of a single blacksmith, with uncertain eyes. She could only hope that he chose to embrace his blood before the Queen's wrath fell upon them all. And now, elsewhere behind closed doors, other forces moved. Varys might have called them little birds, but the webs of the Red Keep were not so easily inherited or destroyed. Spies whispered to the Queen's loyalists that some among the council seemed restless. A gold cloak with shady allegiances overheard talk of a Baratheon bastard. A suspicious reevaluation of the treasury accounts revealed money unaccounted for. All small signs, but they painted a dangerous pattern. One that, if discovered by the wrong ears, could set Cersei on a rampage. For now, the Queen remained in her chambers, toasting her reflection in the mirror with dark wine, blissfully unaware of how close the threads of rebellion coiled around her. But the next dawn would come, and with it questions. In the alleys and antechambers, in secret meeting rooms and crowded forges, an ancient wheel began to turn again, creaking under the weight of history. For better or worse, the capital was on the verge of another upheaval. And Gendry, bastard, blacksmith, reluctant heir, stood at the center of that turning wheel, hammered between duty and survival. The time for decisions would arrive swiftly. Whether the realm would plunge into fresh chaos, or cling to a fragile hope, was in flux, waiting for the pivotal moment when a man born with nothing dared claim the crown meant for the son of Robert Baratheon. Yet for now, the city slept uneasily, lulled by the lullaby of shifting tides. The Red Keep's torches burned against the night sky, a watchful fortress that had seen countless kings rise and fall. But no keep, no fortress, no queen's cruelty would halt the force of a people determined to be free. The first subtle steps of rebellion echoed in hushed corridors, in coded notes, in the slow forging of new alliances, and in the heavy heartbeat of a blacksmith who might soon weigh the fate of a kingdom. Gendry awoke with a start. The room was still dark, a thin moonbeam angling through the crooked shutters, illuminating the uneven planks of the walls. A chill from the harbor's breeze seeped through the gaps in the timber. The restless sleep that had taken him hours to find was now broken, leaving his mind awash with fragments of uneasy dreams. His heart drummed, too fast for the stillness of the night. Images of a crown weighed on his thoughts, and somewhere in the swirling shapes of half-sleep, he had seen flickers of a lion's roar, a silver stag, and the Red Keep looming overhead like a giant shadow. He rubbed his face, ridding himself of the vision. The bed creaked as he sat on the edge, exhaling. Something felt different this morning, or was it still night? He couldn't tell. Sleep clung to him, but thoughts of leaving, of forging a new path, of meeting Lady Sissel in 2 days' time, all crowded into his consciousness. He looked at the little pouch of coins she had given him. It lay on a rickety table, its pale shape catching the faint moonlight. He wondered if it was heavier than it looked. It might as well have been loaded with iron, for the weight of decisions pressed on him like an anvil. He tried to close his eyes again, to squeeze the exhaustion from his lids, but it did no good. The night's hush was punctuated by the distant calls of gulls, the occasional grunt of a dock worker, and the far-off hum of voices still awake in the city's underbelly. King's Landing never truly slept. There was always another hungry soul searching for a stray coin or a chance at survival. Gendry had once been among them as a nameless boy, forging little trinkets, scrabbling for scraps. But now a strange destiny knocked on his door, unbidden and unwanted, yet no less real. With a quiet sigh, he rose and moved about the dark room, pulling on trousers and boots, shrugging into a simple tunic. His arms itched with the memory of yesterday's labor. Pushing open the shutters, he took in the hush of the pre-dawn sky. Black clouds drifted across a waning moon, and the air smelled faintly of salt and wood smoke. For a moment, he thought of taking the coins, grabbing his few belongings, and slipping away before first light. He could find a ship bound for Bravos or Volantis. He had the strength and skill to work as a smith in any port. The thought was tempting. Why not vanish and leave the realm to its own messy squabbles? But as he lingered there, listening to the faint lap of waves against the docks, he knew he wouldn't do it. A sense of wrongness caught in his chest whenever he imagined fleeing. Maybe it was because of everything he had seen in the wars, men and women suffering, the realm battered and scarred. Maybe it was the memory of Devos' kindness, or the memory of Arya's determination. Or maybe it was the small ember of pride that he had inherited from Robert Baratheon, a pride he had tried so long to deny. Duty, honor, or stubbornness, whatever name it went by, it held him back from running. He watched the clouds scuttle across the moon until his eyes felt heavy again. Finally, with a soft groan, he returned to the straw mattress and tried once more to gather rest before daybreak fully arrived. Tomorrow, and the day after, would bring the moment of his decision. Sleep came in fits, broken by the sound of rats scampering in the walls. When morning finally arrived, it did so with a startling brightness that forced him to squint through the crooked window. The entire dock district was astir, cargo being hefted off ships, carriages clattering down the uneven roads. Shouts mixed with the clang of metal. Gendry splashed tepid water on his face from a basin in the corner, brushed his hands through his dark hair, and pulled on a leather jerkin. He pocketed the small pouch of coins and slung his old hammer through a loop on his belt. Though he had no immediate plan for the day, a restlessness under his skin propelled him to leave. Staying in that cramped room felt more claustrophobic now. He stepped out into the dusty lane, early sunlight gilding his boots. The acrid smell of fish guts mingled with the reek of stale ale from the tavern 2 doors down. Beyond the ragged storefronts, merchant ships bobbed in the harbor. He heard foreign tongues drifting on the wind. Sailors from Pentos, Myr, Lys. He remembered the stories that had once filled his head about traveling the seas, forging steel for exotic princes. Life had turned out differently, though. He made his way down the street, nodding absent-mindedly to an old man who recognized him from the forge. "Morning, lad," the man called. "If you're free, I've a broken gate hinge needs mending." Gendry forced a polite smile. "Might be by later," he said. "Got errands first." He continued on, ignoring the slight disappointment in the man's eyes. It was one more example of how unremarkable his life had become. Just another tradesman in a worn city. And yet, in a handful of hours, he might be on the brink of something far greater. The pressure of it made his chest feel tight. His wanderings took him toward the city's interior, away from the reek of fish, and deeper into the cramped, winding streets. Buildings leaned precariously over the road, seemingly ready to collapse into each other. People bustled about, hawking fresh bread, salted eels, or questionable cuts of meat. He slipped through the crowds, occasionally brushing elbows with strangers who barely spared him a glance. That suited him well enough. He needed no attention. Still, he couldn't help noticing the tension that clouded every face. Overly thin children peered from alley corners, their eyes hollow. Small folk muttered under their breath about tax collectors and Lannister soldiers. He heard snatches of conversation as he navigated around stalls. "She's got us paying thrice the coin for half the bread. No sign of shipments from the Reach. They say the roads are blocked. Heard some knights from the Vale arrived, but they want pledge to the Queen." The gloom was as thick as the dusty air. Gendry felt it pressing in. The city was choking, waiting for some relief that never came. He paused at a small vendor selling hot oatcakes. His stomach churned with hunger. A few coppers exchanged hands, and he received a steaming cake wrapped in rough cloth. As he took the first bite, sweet and comforting, he caught sight of a squad of gold cloaks lumbering down the street. Their gaze swept the crowd with a threatening vigilance. The small folk shrank away, knowing better than to draw attention. Gendry ducked behind a knot of people, but the gold cloaks passed on without incident. Still, his appetite soured. He finished the cake out of necessity, but it tasted stale by the last bite. Overhead, the sun climbed higher, driving away the night's lingering chill. His mind wandered back to the memory of Lady Sissel's cool, measured voice. Perhaps he should seek some sense of her presence today, maybe follow his instincts, see if she was being watched. Or maybe he should try to find that smithy by the dragon pit early. But if he arrived too soon, it might draw suspicion or put her at risk. He shook his head, frustrated by the complexities of being cautious. Resolving to explore, he ventured closer to the hill of Rhaenys, where the dragon pit's vast dome loomed in the distance. Years of neglect had left it a husk of its former grandeur, but it was still a notable landmark, visible above the huddle of rooftops. He recalled vague stories that Daenerys Targaryen had once attempted to gather people there, turning it into a meeting place. That felt like a lifetime ago. Now it stood in partial ruin, a silent testament to the realm's tumult. The streets grew narrower as he climbed the slope. Fewer vendors lingered here. Broken cobblestones tripped his boots. He passed a collapsed inn and an old shrine with peeling paint. He asked a thin woman where the nearest smithy might be, but she merely eyed him warily, as though suspicious of any man carrying a hammer. He thanked her for nothing and pressed on. At length, he spotted a modest workshop beneath a sagging roof of slate tiles, set back from the street behind a courtyard of cracked flagstones. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney, and the sign out front depicted an anvil etched into the wood. He paused a moment, steeling himself. Was this the place Sissel had mentioned, or just another random forge? He didn't see any immediate indication it was aligned with her, but the sight of it, half hidden on a rarely traveled path, kindled his suspicion. Quietly, he approached, one hand resting near the hammer at his belt. No apprentice hammered away inside. In fact, the yard seemed empty. Only the faint hiss of a banked fire came from within. He was about to call out when a figure stepped from the shadows beneath the awning. A tall man with soot smudges on his cheeks, arms folded over a leather apron. The man's eyes flicked to Gendry's hammer, then to his face. A tense moment passed. "Lost?" the man asked with a gravelly voice. Gendry cleared his throat, feigning casual interest. "Just looking to see if there's work for a smith, or if the smith here needs a pair of strong arms." The man's brow furrowed. He gave a curt jerk of his head, inviting Gendry to step closer. When Gendry obeyed, the man spoke in a low tone. "We don't get many customers these days, and I don't hire apprentices, haven't the coin. Now be on your way." A gust of wind ruffled the man's hair, and Gendry noticed the flicker of suspicion in the smith's eyes, as though measuring him. Gendry swallowed, recalling Sissel's words. She'd said to come after sundown in 3 days if he'd made his decision. Clearly this was the right place, but he was too early. He forced a slight shrug. "Apologies. Thought maybe I could earn a coin or two. Heard you might have need of a skilled blacksmith." He let that linger, hoping the clue was enough to confirm the man recognized him. The man's expression darkened. "Not here," he muttered. "Move along." He turned his back on Gendry and stalked into the smithy, leaving Gendry standing alone in the yard. It was a terse dismissal, but the tension in the man's stance told Gendry this was indeed the contact Sissel had mentioned. They were being cautious. Any watchers might see them. With a final glance, Gendry obeyed the implied instruction and stepped away, returning to the narrow street. The morning sun felt harsher now. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling equal parts relief and apprehension. If that was Sissel's ally, there was no welcoming banner or cozy arrangement. Every bit of this rebellion would be done in hushed tones. He cut a zigzag path back down the hill, passing more vacant storefronts. A line of ragged children dashed by him, their feet bare on the stones as they whooped in a game of chase. He wondered if they had enough to eat, if their parents worried about tomorrow's taxes or the Queen's next decree. The realm felt tired, hollowed out. Every corner of King's Landing he passed confirmed the same. Cersei's rule was a slow suffocation, and the city coughed under its weight. By midday, Gendry's stomach rumbled again, so he found a small tavern near the city's center. He chose the place because it was nondescript, a simple wooden door with a faded sign reading the broken compass. Inside, the smell of sour ale and onion stew engulfed him. A few patrons hunched over rough tables, nursing cheap drinks. Gendry took a seat in the corner, near a window where he could watch the street. He ordered a bowl of stew and some watered-down ale, offering a silver stag from the pouch Sissel had given him. The tavern keeper, An older woman with tired eyes gave him a brief stare before fetching his meal. He stirred the stew, letting the savory aroma fill his nose, and studied the passers-by outside. Was anyone watching him? He saw only the usual foot traffic. Messengers, beggars, the occasional sellsword. Perhaps the queen's spies were more subtle than he could discern. He felt as though 1,000 eyes might be upon him. But there was no overt sign of it. He ate quickly, finishing the bowl and chasing it with the ale. Hunger abated, leaving him slightly queasy from tension rather than from anything in the food. He set down the bowl, drew in a deep breath, and reviewed his options. He could continue biding his time, staying in the dockside room until the designated night to meet Sissel. Or he could roam the city, see if there were rumors about him, about a Baratheon bastard. But that might risk exposing himself. The best course, he decided, was to remain inconspicuous. He had endured anonymity for years. 2 more days wouldn't kill him. With that resolve, he left the tavern and headed back toward the waterfront. As he walked, he noted the pockets of gloom in each district. Boarded-up shops, signs scrawled with closed. The merchants who remained open looked haggard. People pleaded with the city watch for some relief or concession. But none was given. A sense of hopelessness thickened the air, and Gendry's mood sank beneath it. At last, he reached the rundown building he called home. He crept inside, grateful to find no unwelcome visitors lurking. Leaning his hammer against the wall, he sank onto the shabby stool by the table, letting out a long sigh. The rest of the day crawled by in a haze. He dozed once or twice, mind swirling with half-formed thoughts. Outside, the city rumbled on, oblivious to the quiet crisis at its heart. Night fell slowly. Street lanterns flickered in the gloom, and the racket of drunken sailors drifted through the shutters. Gendry lit a small lamp of his own, more to chase away the darkness in his thoughts than for any practical task. He rummaged through his few belongings: a spare set of clothes, a small kit for sharpening and polishing metal, a battered waterskin. He had no real keepsakes, no tokens of a life beyond forging. Everything he owned fit into a single sack. It struck him how strange it would be to become king, if that was even possible, and yet carry so little in the world. He tried to sleep. The nights were long, haunted by restlessness, and each time he dozed, he jerked awake with his heart pounding. In one dream, he was in the throne room, the iron throne towering before him, every sword blade glinting. When he approached, the swords bent and changed shape, melting into horseshoes and nails, things he had forged. In the echoing corridors, he heard laughter, maybe his father's, maybe someone else. He woke in a sweat, feeling more unsure than ever. By the next morning, the tension within him had become a steady throb. Time seemed to creep forward, each hour marked by a dull ache of anticipation. He forced himself to the forge yard at the docks, trying to keep up the routine so he wouldn't raise suspicions. He hammered out a few basic items for passers-by: a new clasp for a merchant's chest, a wrought iron bracket for a fisherman's net. The work distracted his hands, but his mind remained divided. Customers came and went, paying little heed to the large man with the grim face. They simply needed their metal mended. By midday, he'd earned a handful of coppers. It was menial, but it kept him occupied. He paused once, wiping sweat from his brow, and glimpsed a pair of gold cloaks strolling nearby. His pulse spiked. Were they looking at him more intently than usual? It felt like they lingered a moment too long before continuing. Gendry pretended to reheat a piece of metal, focusing on the roar of the flames, trying to ignore the uneasy prickling on his skin. Let them look, he thought. I'm just a blacksmith. But inside, he feared they might sense something. He wondered if Sissel or her allies had noticed the gold cloaks too. After the soldiers passed, Gendry couldn't help scanning the busy street for any sign of watchers. He saw no one obvious, no face that repeated itself in the crowd. Still, his wariness remained. When the sun slanted toward evening, he wrapped up his work, banked the forge, and collected his meager coins. Back in his dim room, he ate a small supper of bread and watered wine. Tomorrow would be the day. Tomorrow after sundown, he was meant to meet Sissel at that out-of-the-way smithy. The inevitability of it weighed on him. Fear mingled with a flicker of an unnameable excitement, a sense that maybe he could do something worthwhile for once. He told himself not to dwell on it too much, but the hours dragged by. He paced the floor, stood at the window, lay on the bed, then got up to pace some more. He tried to recall every piece of advice Davos had given him, every stern word from the man who'd risked his life to save him. "It's not so bad being a bastard," Davos had once told him. "As long as you don't let it rule you. Your birth doesn't define you, Gendry, your choices do." The memory made him smile softly. Then it made his heart squeeze with regret, because Davos was far away. He had no idea where that wise man might be now, or if he even lived. Night settled in again. He managed some sleep, this time with fewer dreams, and woke to the watery light of dawn. His resolution was set. He would go to the outskirts near the dragon pit at the designated time. He would meet Lady Sissel. He would hear her plan. He would decide once and for all if this was a cause he could truly stand behind, or if he needed to run. That day he found it impossible to concentrate on any forging. Instead, he wandered the city in a circuitous path, doubling back at times to make sure no one followed. He browsed the wares of a market stall, nodded to a pair of rag-clothed women who sold herbs, lingered by a well as a cluster of children fetched water in clay jugs. Each time he paused, he scanned the surroundings discreetly. Once he noticed a figure in a hooded cloak slip into an alley. His heart clenched, but when he went to look, the alley was empty. It could have been a trick of his anxious mind. Afternoon stretched into early evening, and Gendry circled back to his room. He gathered his sack of belongings, leaving nothing behind. If this meeting went badly, he might have to flee in a hurry. With a tight-lipped grimace, he strapped on a short knife for security, belted his hammer in place, and pocketed the coins. Then, dousing the small lamp, he took one last look at the dingy space that had sheltered him these last few weeks. There was no sentiment here, just relief to be leaving. He pulled the door closed and walked away, the corridor swallowing him in shadows. The city was less crowded at twilight. Most vendors had packed up their stalls. The few who remained cast him weary glances as he passed. He kept his head low, letting the lengthening shadows mask his face. Overhead, the sky was streaked with purples and oranges, the last vestiges of daylight clinging to the horizon. A hush seemed to grip the streets, as though the city braced for night's uncertain perils. He climbed toward the Hill of Rainies again, each footstep echoing in the thinning crowd. Lanterns flickered on doorways, revealing chipped walls and battered shutters. The journey felt long despite the short distance. At last, he recognized the slumping roofline of the hidden forge. A single wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, illuminated by the glow of a lantern within. He hesitated outside the gate. Darkness crept along the yard. No sign of watchers or gold cloaks. Trying to steady his nerves, he pushed the gate open and stepped onto the cracked flagstones. The clang of metal rang out. Someone was working inside. He approached, heart drumming, until the tall smith appeared in the doorway once more, holding a pair of tongs. The man's eyes flicked to Gendry, then darted past him, checking for anyone else. "Inside," the smith said curtly. "Hurry, Pa." Gendry ducked beneath the lintel, stepping into the forge's interior. It smelled of hot coal and the tang of iron. A single lantern cast shifting shadows on the walls, which were lined with tools, hammers, tongs, half-finished pieces of metal. A partition separated the front work area from a small back room. He saw a figure waiting there, partially obscured by gloom. His heart lurched when he recognized Lady Sissel. She wore a simple black cloak, her auburn hair tied back, a thin layer of grime smudged across her cheek. Clearly, she hadn't come in regal finery. The moment she saw him, she offered a slight nod. "You came," she said, voice low. "I said I'd think about it," Gendry replied. His voice felt scratchy in the closeness of the forge. "I'm here, so I'm ready to listen." The smith closed the door behind him, setting the iron bar he carried against the wall with a muted clang. Then he stood guard, arms folded. Lady Sissel drew a careful breath, stepping closer to Gendry. "I'm glad. We have much to discuss. We're short on time, so let's not waste words." Gendry nodded, glancing around. Just you two? She gave a faint smirk. For now. Others will join later, once we're certain it's safe. You understand we can't risk gathering too many at once. The Queen's spies might be anywhere. She gestured to a small stool near the workbench. Sit if you like. This may take a while. Gendry perched on the stool, setting his sack on the floor. He rested his hands on his knees, trying to appear calmer than he felt. The forge's heat pressed against his skin. Lady Sissel remained standing, though she loosened her cloak slightly. It's possible you've already guessed some of what's happening, she began. Cersei's rule cannot sustain itself. The small folk are desperate, the lords restless. Our debts choke every aspect of governance. A new war looms on the horizon. Shall either provoke the other great houses, or they'll move first. Either way, it's carnage. The smith grunted. It'll be the city that suffers most. I've seen it before. Sissel nodded in agreement. Precisely. The small council, or at least some of us, believe we need a Baratheon heir to rally the kingdom under a more legitimate banner. You are that heir, Gendry. Whether you want the throne or not, you represent something the realm hasn't had since Robert's days. A simpler line, unburdened by the Lannisters' crimes. Gendry listened, jaw tight. He recalled Cersei's cruelty, how she'd set the city ablaze with fear more than once, how she'd orchestrated the downfall of anyone who opposed her. And you think people will follow me because I'm Robert's bastard, even if I'm no lord, no knight, no. Because you're his son in truth, Sissel corrected softly. He may not have acknowledged you publicly, but you carry his features, his blood. Plenty saw him carousing in King's Landing, fathering bastards everywhere. You're not the only one I know to be recognized by King, by the Targaryen Queen, at least briefly. Even that half recognition might mean something to the more flexible lords who simply want a stable line of succession. Her words rang through the forge, echoing. Gendry's chest felt tighter with each passing moment. He remembered how Daenerys had casually legitimized him after the battle against the dead. He had hardly thought it mattered once everything fell apart. But do the lords know about that? Will they even care about a decree from a dead Targaryen queen? Sissel glanced at the smith. The man kept silent, letting her speak. She turned back to Gendry. Some will care, some won't. You're right that it isn't a guaranteed path. But the important part is the Baratheon name. The Stormlands have always been proud. Your father was once beloved for his prowess, if not for his virtues. The realm has been battered by Targaryens, Lannisters, Boltons, you name it. Many see in House Baratheon a return to a more familiar monarchy. Even if you lack the refined upbringing of a prince, your blood ties bind you to the Stormlords and others who might prefer you over Cersei. No, Xiao. Gendry's mind spun. He had no illusions that he could simply stroll into the throne room and place the crown on his head. How do you propose we do this without sparking another war? Her lips pressed into a thin line. We aim to replace the queen from within. If enough of the gold cloaks side with us, if enough lords in the capital throw in their lot, we can force her to abdicate. The small council will declare your claim valid, or at least provide enough backing that the rest of the realm accepts it. Hopefully, we can avoid a full-scale uprising. But it won't be bloodless. There's always a cost. You must be prepared for that. Nendikar. He thought of how many times he'd heard people say, "There's always a cost." It was a familiar refrain in King's Landing. A man had to pay in coin or in blood. Gendry swallowed. If I say yes, what's next? Sissel stepped closer, keeping her voice low. You'll have to be presented before certain key figures. Not publicly at first. We need to gather them secretly, one by one. Lords, knights, merchants with influence. And let them see that you are who we say you are. We must prepare you, teach you the protocols so you don't appear a common blacksmith. You'll need the posture, the manner of speech, just enough to pass muster. Then, when the moment is right, we'll remove Cersei from power. We'll do it swiftly, with minimal bloodshed, if possible. His heart thudded. The notion of passing as a king, learning to speak and bow like some noble, he felt a surge of anxiety. But beneath that was a strange spark of determination. He pictured the faces of starving children, the hollowness in the eyes of the people. If it meant easing their burden, if it meant sparing them another decade of oppression, perhaps it was worth it. Sissel could see his hesitation. No one expects you to be perfect. This is about giving the realm a chance, a leader they can rally behind. Others will help you manage the actual governance. You only need the will to stand before them, to carry that stad's name with pride, and to keep your heart in the right place. You must promise not to become another tyrant. Gendry let out a shaky breath. I don't want that. I've seen enough cruelty to last a lifetime. If I do this, I do it because the realm needs something else. Something better. But if it all goes wrong, she placed a hand gently on his forearm. We know the risks. If Cersei finds out before we're ready, we'll all be dead. But doing nothing means the realm starves and burns under her madness. So we act. He nodded slowly, meeting her gaze. Then I'm in, he murmured, his voice unexpectedly firm. I'll stand with you. A flicker of relief crossed her features. The tall smith exhaled quietly, as though letting go of a breath held too long. Gendry felt a small sense of resolve wash over him, like stepping off a ledge into unknown waters. His father's name had once felt like a chain. Now, maybe, it could be a key. Sissel straightened, pulling out a rolled parchment from inside her cloak. First things first, you'll need a place to stay where prying eyes won't find you. The Queen's men patrol every major inn. We've arranged a safe house in the city, an unremarkable building near the Street of Looms. Sir Martin Moore will meet us there in 2 days' time. He's a loyalist to our cause, though he pretends to serve Cersei. He'll help finalize the steps. Yes, sir. 2 days? Gendry repeated. What about tonight? Tonight, we keep you hidden here, the smith interjected. His voice was low, and he tapped a foot on the ground. I have a small chamber in the back. Not comfortable, but it's private. Sissel nodded. We'll leave separately tomorrow, at intervals, to avoid suspicion. I'll come for you after dark. We'll move you to the safe house. Then we'll begin discreet meetings with the small council members who are with us. No. Gendry took a moment to absorb it all. The reality felt oddly surreal. A day ago, he'd been forging horseshoes and gate hinges, a nobody on the fringes of the city. Now he was agreeing to overthrow a queen. He flexed his hands, calloused and strong, as though reminding himself he was real. All right, he said. I suppose I'd best get used to secret doors and clandestine meetings. Sissel allowed a thin smile. It won't be forever. Someday you'll walk openly through the Red Keep without having to look over your shoulder. Man? He nodded, though the idea of strolling through the Red Keep with a crown on his head nearly made him dizzy. I'm trusting you, he said, his voice soft but earnest. I hope we can truly help these people. Her expression was serious. That's my hope as well, Gendry. Too many have died for nothing in this realm. She turned to the smith. I'll take my leave. Keep the door barred. I'll return tomorrow evening with news. Be ready. The smith grunted in acknowledgement. Gendry noticed a subtle sign of respect between Sissel and the older man, though neither said anything more. She moved to the door, cracked it open, and slipped into the night with practiced stealth. The smith closed and bolted it behind her. Through here, he told Gendry, gesturing toward a cramped hallway at the rear of the workshop. Gendry followed, passing shelves stacked with metal scraps and unidentifiable bits of half-finished ironwork. The hall ended in a tiny chamber, barely large enough for a cot. A single shuttered window looked out onto darkness. It smelled of dust and old coal. You can sleep here, the smith said curtly, lighting a stubby candle that flickered against the dingy walls. Better than a cell in the Red Keep, I suppose. Gendry half laughed without humor. I've slept in worse. He dropped his sack on the cot, turning back to face the man. I don't even know your name. The smith paused, then offered a single nod. Edric. I was once an armorer for the City Watch. Saw enough of their corruption to last a lifetime. Sissel asked for my help, and I'd sooner do this than keep forging swords for tyrants. Benson. Edric's weathered face bore deep lines and a faint scar near his left temple. Gendry saw in him the tired resolve of a man who'd lost faith in the Queen's cause but still believed in something better. It was a look Gendry himself recognized. "I appreciate you letting me stay," Gendry said, keeping his voice low. Edric merely gave a grunt of acknowledgement. "You should rest. I'll bring you some food in a bit. Best if we don't keep the lights on too long. The city might have prying eyes." With that, he returned to the forge, leaving Gendry alone. The candle's tiny flame danced, sending shadows crawling across the cramped space. Gendry lowered himself onto the cot, resting his back against the rough wall. He felt an odd calm settle over him, a stark contrast to the raging uncertainty of the past few days. Now he had a direction, a plan, albeit a dangerous one. He wondered if it would truly matter, if the realm would accept him, if he could bear the weight of a crown. His thoughts drifted to the stories he'd heard as a boy of Robert Baratheon, the Hammer of the Rebellion, the man who toppled the Targaryen dynasty. Gendry had never imagined he might follow in his father's footsteps, forging a rebellion of his own. But times had changed, and perhaps so had he. If the realm needed him, he would stand up. He only prayed it wouldn't lead to more bloodshed, more heartbreak. God told him to know yours was heartbreak. Over the next hour, Edric brought him a bowl of thin soup and a heel of bread. Gendry ate in silence, then extinguished the candle, lying in darkness with the clang of Edric's tinkering in the other room as a lullaby. Exhaustion took hold. Eventually, he succumbed to sleep, drifting into the unknown with a hammer at his side. Morning brought no rays of sunlight into the tiny chamber, only the faint haze of daylight seeping through cracks in the shutter. Gendry awoke slowly, neck stiff, stomach growling. He rolled off the cot and found a basin of water waiting for him. It was tepid and smelled faintly of coal dust, but it was enough to rinse his face and hands. The moment he stepped into the workshop, Edric was already at the anvil, shaping a piece of iron with sure, steady blows. Gendry hovered near the doorway. "Morning." Edric gave him a glance, then nodded at a crust of bread on the workbench. "He ate that. There's a bit of cheese left, too. You can help me with the forging if you want, but don't show your face outside." Sissel said keep you hidden. Grateful for the small kindness, Gendry ate the bread and cheese in a few bites, then stepped to the forge. The routine of heating metal, hammering and quenching, brought him a sense of normalcy, a reminder of simpler times. Together, they worked through the day, forging nails, hooks, and other mundane items. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept Gendry's mind off the looming evening when Sissel would come. Occasionally, Edric would break the silence with a curt instruction or a word of approval. The rhythmic clang of hammers was a comforting language they both spoke. Afternoon shadows stretched across the windows, dimming the workshop. Edric banked the fire, wiping sweat from his brow. Gendry leaned against the anvil, arms quivering from hours of labor. A sense of camaraderie had formed between them, unspoken but tangible. He swallowed a mouthful of lukewarm water and asked quietly, "Do you think this plan will work?" Edric was quiet for a moment, gaze fixed on the glowing coals. "I've seen plans fail. I've seen a few succeed. There's no easy answer, but Sissel has her wits about her. If anyone can thread this needle without burning the city down, it might be her." Gendry managed a weary nod. "I hope so," they said, little else. As dusk approached, Edric cleared the workbench and stashed any valuable tools. Then they doused most of the lamps, leaving only a single candle burning. Night fell fully, black and silent. Gendry felt his nerves prickle, waiting for Sissel to arrive. Every creak of the timbers made him jump. Every scuff outside made him wonder if the gold cloaks had come. But no. Each time, it was just the wind or a stray cat prowling the yard. At last, in the deep hush of night, a soft knock sounded at the forge's side door. Edric and Gendry exchanged glances. Edric grabbed a small crossbow from behind a crate and motioned to Gendry to stay hidden. Carefully, he cracked open the door. A whisper reached them. "Edric, it's me." Sissel slipped inside, eyes flicking from Edric to Gendry. She was dressed in dark garments again, her hair pulled close to her scalp, and she carried a small satchel. Her breath came in quick bursts, as though she'd hurried. She waved for Edric to lock the door, then beckoned Gendry to her side. He noticed the tension in her posture. "We must leave at once," she murmured. "Something's happened at the Red Keep. The Queen is more agitated than usual, and the gold cloaks are performing random searches." "Bummy." Gendry's heart jumped. "Do they suspect?" She shook her head. "Not sure yet. But we can't stay here. Sir Martin will meet us at the safe house tonight instead of tomorrow. Let's go." Edric fetched a hooded cloak for Gendry, and he shrugged it on, adjusting it so his face remained in shadow. Sizzle quietly led them out the back door and into a cramped alley behind the workshop, where a small cart waited. A skinny donkey pawed at the ground, wearing harnesses that looked older than Gendry. Sizzle slipped onto the driver's seat, motioning for Gendry to climb in beside her. Edric joined them in the back, crossbow laid discreetly on his lap beneath a threadbare blanket. They set off through the narrow lanes. The donkey's hooves clopped in a slow, measured rhythm, and Sizzle steered with subtle guidance, winding through back streets that seemed designed to thwart watchers. Gendry listened intently for any sign of pursuit. Now and then, a lantern glowed in a window, revealing a curious face peering out. Dogs barked in the distance. The city, though quieter at night, never truly slumbered. They navigated deeper into the labyrinth of King's Landing, passing close to the Street of Steel, the Street of Flour, and eventually the Street of Looms. Here, weavers and cloth dyers lived in cramped houses, many of which doubled as small workshops. In the darkness, it was hard to see more than silhouettes of spinning wheels and half-finished bolts of cloth. A faint odor of dye hung in the air, acrid and pungent. Sizzle guided the cart to a stop behind a row of stacked barrels. A modest two-story building loomed just beyond. Its shutters closed. She whispered instructions. "We'll go inside. The front door is around the corner. Edric, stay back until I give the signal. Gendry, with me." Gendry nodded. The donkey stamped a hoof impatiently as he hopped off the cart. Sizzle took him by the arm and led him around the barrels, onto a narrow path that ran between two buildings. They emerged onto a small courtyard of worn cobblestones. The house in front of them looked like any other in the district, plain wooden door, an overhanging second floor. A single lantern flickered by the threshold. Sizzle gave 3 soft taps, paused, then 2 more. After a tense moment, the door opened, revealing Sir Martin Moore holding a candle. His hair, usually neatly combed, looked disheveled. He ushered them inside, hastily shutting and bolting the door. In the flickering light, Gendry saw lines of worry etched in Martin's face. "We had to rush," the knight said, guiding them into a small sitting room. "Her Grace is on a rampage tonight. Word is, she suspects someone in the council is plotting something. She's doubling the guard shifts." "Done." Sizzle pressed her lips thin. She must have gleaned a hint. Not enough to name names, or we'd already be seized, but she's close to something. Gendry's stomach twisted. The danger was more real than ever. He forced himself to keep calm, scanning the room. The space was modestly furnished with a few chairs, a table, a hearth, where a small fire crackled. No one else seemed to be present. Moments later, Edric slipped in, crossbow in hand, and Martin locked the door behind him. With the group assembled, Sir Martin let out a breath. "We must act swiftly. My queen keeps me busy with errands, but I overheard her instructing her new captain of the guard to root out every trace of sedition. She's posted watchers near the Baylor statue, near the gates, even on the roads toward the dragon pit. If she finds out about Gendry..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Gendry could imagine well enough. Sizzle moved to the table, pulling her satchel open. She removed a small sheaf of papers. "These are notes from Ormond Ailes. He's arranged discreet payments to certain gold cloak officers who might be amenable to switching allegiance once the moment arrives. We've also identified a few lesser lords in the Crownlands who've expressed interest in a Baratheon restoration. But we have to be certain the City Watch will not fight us en masse. If they side with the Queen, we'll have a bloodbath." "No. Very quiet." Martin frowned. "The Watch is poorly paid. Their loyalty can be bought if we do it cleverly, or at least enough of them to matter. Cersei's presence might still sway a portion, but if we present Gendry as the rightful king, citing Robert's memory, they may desert her." "Bunadar." Edric joined the circle, standing behind Gendry with arms crossed. "We need the realm to see him. We can't hide him away, but we must do it carefully." Sissel nodded. "We'll start small. A quiet meeting of those we trust. Lord Ormond, Sir Martin, perhaps 2 others. We show them Gendry. We explain his parentage, our plan. Then we expand outward. If enough people commit, we can orchestrate a day to strike. We confront the Queen, ideally with minimal bloodshed. A forced abdication might be possible if we corner her with no path to flee." "Benara." Gendry listened intently. The talk felt surreal, as though they were planning a wedding or a festival rather than high treason. Yet every detail buzzed with risk. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice not to shake. "All right, when do we do this meeting?" "Tomorrow night," Martin said quietly. "Here, if we can manage. We'll have to stagger our rivals to avoid suspicion." Gendry glanced around the dingy sitting room with its peeling paint and faint smell of dust. It was hardly the place one would expect to birth a rebellion. Yet it was better than the open street. "What about the rest of the city?" Sissel traded glances with Martin. She folded her arms, her voice lowering. "The city is tense. Ration lines form at dawn. People mutter that the Queen has run out of gold. Some fear another riot, like the one that happened years ago when they attacked the royal procession. We must move before the city erupts. Otherwise, we'll lose any chance of a peaceful transition." Gendry took a steadying breath. "Then let's do it." He met Martin's gaze. "I'm in your hands. If I can help, speak to these lords. Show them I'm not just some poser. Just tell me what to do." Martin dipped his head. "Your humility is a good start. Too many nobles wouldn't stoop to ask for guidance. We'll teach you what you need to say. Be yourself, but also be a Baratheon. Show some of that storm's fierceness if anyone doubts you." Gendry gave a small, tight smile. He wasn't sure he had a storm's fierceness in him. He felt more battered by the storm than wielding it. Still, he would do his best. They spent the next hour poring over details. Sissel outlined which lords were likely to attend tomorrow's gathering, which corners of the city they might slip through undetected. Martin described how Ormond was discreetly funneling money to certain gold cloak captains. Edric stood guard by the window, occasionally peering through the shutters to ensure no watchers lurked outside. Gendry tried to absorb it all, though his head swam with the intricacy. Finally, they agreed on a plan. Martin would return to the Red Keep before dawn to keep up appearances. Sissel would move between safe houses, coordinating the arrivals. Edric and Gendry would stay put until the others gathered. If the Queen's soldiers came sniffing around, they'd have to flee. With that, Sissel and Martin prepared to slip out. Gendry stood by the window, heart pounding as he watched them vanish into the night. Edric bolted the door, checked every window, then set a chair in the corner to keep vigil. Gendry sank onto a threadbare cushion, exhausted. Tomorrow night, the first real step of the rebellion would unfold. He prayed silently that they had enough cunning and enough luck to avoid the Queen's wrath. In the flickering firelight, he stared at the battered boards of the ceiling. Outside, the city seemed to hold its breath, poised on the brink of something vast and inescapable. Gendry closed his eyes and tried to envision a king's landing freed from fear, from hunger, from the tyranny of a mad queen. He pictured men forging swords for protection rather than oppression. Children playing without the shadow of soldiers looming. If it took claiming the Baratheon name, stepping onto a throne that had spelled death for so many, perhaps it was a burden he was willing to bear. He drifted into a tenuous sleep, lulled by the distant hum of the city at night. Edric stood silent guard, crossbow in hand, while the embers in the hearth slowly died. And somewhere in the dark corridors of the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister plotted her next move, her suspicions keener than ever, unaware that the wheel of fate was turning in quiet corners, forging the seeds of her downfall. Night's heavy silence pressed against the windows. The safe house nestled deep in the street of looms felt closer than the cramped forge had been, but still there was an air of danger lingering around every corner. Gendry dozed for a few hours, though now and then he startled awake, half dreaming of footsteps in the hallway or the crash of doors being kicked in. Each time, he jerked upright, hands clutching at the rough blanket, breath coming in gulps. In those moments, the flickering glow of the small hearth was the only reassurance. Edric dozed with his back propped against the wall, crossbow balanced on his knees, ready for any disturbance. Eventually, a faint gray light touched the shuttered windows. Morning rose without fanfare, a pale wash that revealed the barren interior of their temporary refuge. Gendry rubbed his eyes and stretched, feeling the ache in his shoulders. He was used to forging metal all day, but the weight of dread sat heavier than any hammer. He went to the room's single window and eased a shutter open, a mere crack. Outside, the winding lane was almost deserted. A cat slunk past a row of tilted crates, and a ragged child darted across the street to vanish down an alley. No sign of gold cloaks. He offered a silent thanks to the 7 gods he'd never fully believed in, then shut the window again. Edric stirred, sitting straighter. Quiet. Gendry nodded. So far. They spoke in hushed voices, so as not to wake any neighbors who might be listening through thin walls. The hush felt like a permanent fixture. No easy banter, no relaxed jokes. The entire city had gone taut with tension under the Queen's watchful eye. Hungry but lacking provisions, Gendry searched the small cupboards. He found a meager stash of dried beans and a half-empty flask of ale. "Not much for breakfast," he murmured, showing the contents to Edric. Edric scratched at his stubble. "We'll have to make do. When Sissel comes, maybe she'll bring supplies." They soaked the beans in water from a bucket near the door and set them in a small pot over the hearth. The faint smell of simmering food was better than nothing, though Gendry's stomach rumbled impatiently. While they waited, he dipped cloth in water, cleaning the grime from his arms and face. He wanted to look more presentable. Tonight he would meet with lords who might pledge themselves to him, to the Baratheon clan. The idea weighed on him like an anvil. He caught sight of himself in a small shard of mirror above the cupboard. Dark hair, broad shoulders, the faint lines of worry already etched into his brow. He hardly looked regal. Yet he couldn't deny the same black hair that had once marked Robert Baratheon's bastards for all to see. In a realm that had grown hungry for a recognizable symbol, his features might mean something. Edric cleared his throat. "I'll head outside, do a quick check. Keep an eye on the beans." Gendry nodded, though the notion of Edric leaving made him uneasy. "Be careful. I'm just stepping around the corner. If we're being watched, best to know it." With that, Edric slipped out, carefully lifting the latch on the back door. The door closed behind him, leaving Gendry alone. The hiss of the simmering beans provided the only sound. He shifted restlessly, scanning the cramped living space. A table with 2 chairs, a cold slate floor, shutters that cut off most of the daylight. Shadows loomed at the edges of his vision, a reminder that no candle could fully banish fear. Minutes trickled by with excruciating slowness. Gendry ladled some beans into a bowl and tested them. Still tough, but edible enough to stave off hunger. He ate while crouched by the hearth, the warmth of the fire against his face. In the drifting smoke, he caught the smell of singed dust. The entire day stretched before him like an endless trial of patience, waiting until nightfall when Sizzle and the others might arrive. At last, the back door opened, and Edric reappeared, shaking off the chill morning air. No sign of watchers. Streets mostly empty, a few shopkeepers opening their shutters. Gendry exhaled, relieved. Good. Edric eyed the bowl of beans with mild interest. "Save me some?" Gendry handed over what remained. Edric ate quickly, grimacing at the blandness, but making no complaint. Then they banked the hearth so it wouldn't draw attention with too much smoke. With the morning creeping on, there was little to do but wait. They passed the hours speaking in low tones, discussing forging techniques, the best way to shape steel for a sword's tang, or how to temper a blade so it held a keen edge. Gendry found himself relaxing into the familiar talk, forgetting momentarily that he was plotting to overthrow a queen. Edric had once crafted arms for the city watch. He recounted how cheaply the officers demanded the steel be made, how corners were cut so the watch's coin would stretch. shoddy swords for men paid too little to care. It was a bleak glimpse into King's Landing's daily corruption. Gendry felt a sour taste in his mouth. This was the realm's capital, yet so much rotted behind the facade of power. Afternoon came, signaled only by the gray light shifting angles through the shutters. The lane in outside grew somewhat busier with foot traffic. Occasionally Gendry heard a cart trundling by, or the muffled shout of a vendor. But the sense of gloom lingered. Many shops still didn't open, likely unable to afford the Queen's crushing taxes. The thought of entire families going hungry angered Gendry. If the rebellion failed, it would mean more of the same or worse. Something had to change. Eventually, Edric rose and paced the floor. "I'll check again. Might go around front this time, see if there's any sign of gold cloaks." He paused, turning to Gendry. "You all right here alone?" Gendry gave a firm nod. "I'll be fine. Just don't take too long." Edric slipped out once more, leaving Gendry in silence. The hours weighed on him like a physical burden. He tried to focus on the plan. Tonight, Sir Martin and Sissel would bring a handful of potential allies. Gendry would present himself as Robert Baratheon's son, speak plainly about why he had returned, and attempt to earn their trust. He suspected they'd have questions. Some would doubt his claim. Others might scoff at his lack of noble bearing. He breathed slowly, thinking back to lessons Davos had given him. How to hold himself when people were watching. How to speak with honesty yet confidence. He was no courtly lord, but he had learned a scrap of composure, enough to keep from making a fool of himself. The moments ticked by. Shadows lengthened. Gendry was almost surprised to notice that daylight had begun to fade. He felt the anticipation rise, along with a coil of dread in his gut. If the meeting went poorly, if someone betrayed them or turned coward, all might be lost. At the very least, Cersei would be alerted. She might tighten her grip further, or send her soldiers to crush this budding resistance. He wrestled with those thoughts until Edric returned, letting in a gust of cooler air. "Still nothing," Edric reported. "The city watch is out in force near the main squares. But around here, it's quiet. People keep indoors. It's as if they sense trouble brewing." "None Cersei." Gendry nodded, exhaling. "We might be the trouble." Edric let a hint of a wry smile touch his lips. "We might be the solution too." They exchanged no more words on the subject. Instead, they prepared in small, practical ways. Edric fetched a few extra chairs from an upstairs storeroom, wobbling but functional. Gendry swept dust into a corner, trying to make the space marginally more presentable. They didn't want to appear too furtive or disorganized when the lords arrived. If each one came in expecting a serious endeavor, at least the room should look like more than a beggar's den. Twilight deepened. The city sounds shifted, becoming the shouts of late-day hawkers trying to offload whatever was left. In the distance, a pair of city bells clanged out the passing of another hour. Though Gendry wasn't sure which sept they belonged to, he felt every muscle in his body tense, poised on a knife's edge. Any moment now, Sissel might arrive with the first of their guests. He lit a single lantern, placing it on the table to cast a warm glow. The corners of the room faded into shadow. Edric stepped outside once more to wait. They'd agreed it was safer for Edric to stand at a discreet vantage, ready to guide the visitors in, rather than have them wander around the building searching for the right door. Gendry sat in one of the chairs, trying not to fidget. Hours of forging had never left him this tense. He tried to remind himself, if this was to be his path, if he truly meant to claim the throne, he'd have to endure far greater pressures than a clandestine meeting. He forced his shoulders to relax, inhaling deeply. The swirling thoughts of fatherhood, Robert's image in his mind, made him uneasy. He recalled stories of how Robert had been so charismatic that men followed him gladly. Gendry had no illusions of having that same ease with words or presence. But maybe sincerity counted for something. Night spread fully across the city. One by one, the watchers' lanterns glimmered in windows, and the hush of curfew fell on certain districts. Gendry's heart pounded at every creak. Then at last, the faint sound of the door latch being lifted. He stood, trying to steady his breathing. The door swung inward. Sissel stepped in first, cloaked in deep gray. Behind her followed a stout man in a plain black doublet, Lord Ormond Ailes, the master of coin. Gendry recognized him from the forges in the Red Keep years ago, though the man had likely never noticed a nameless apprentice. Sir Martin Moore entered next, eyes scanning the shadows. Two others followed behind him. One was a middle-aged woman in a dark cloak, face partially concealed by the hood, though Gendry glimpsed a resolute expression. The other was a tall man with a hawkish nose and cautious eyes. None of them wore their house sigils openly. Edric shut the door quietly after them, throwing the bolt. The room seemed to shrink with so many people inside. Sissel pulled back her hood, offering Gendry a small nod of greeting. Then she gestured toward the newcomers. "Lord Ormond, Sir Martin, you already know. May I present Lady Roseanne Derry of the Riverlands and Sir Lyle Conklin of the Crownlands?" She spoke quietly, as though the walls themselves might be listening. Gendry inclined his head in a greeting, not quite sure if he should bow. He settled for a respectful nod. Lady Roseanne pushed back her hood, revealing streaks of gray in her auburn hair, while Sir Lyle removed his own cloak, exposing the worn insignia of a minor Crownlands house on the breast of his doublet. Sissel turned to them, voice calm. "We are here because we share a belief that the Queen cannot remain on the throne. We risk our lives discussing this, yet we must. I trust each of you to hold your tongues." Lady Roseanne spoke first, her tone direct. "I've come a long way. I need more than whispers, mistress of whispers. I need proof we're not chasing a fool's dream." Her gaze flicked to Gendry. "This is the Baratheon bastard, I take it?" Sir Lyle also frowned, studying Gendry with open skepticism. "He looks the part, but we've all heard stories of the black-haired babes. How do we know he's the one?" Gendry's cheeks burned. He'd expected doubt, but hearing it aloud made him feel like a specimen under inspection. He drew in a breath and took a step forward. "I am Gendry. My mother worked in a tavern in the city. Robert Baratheon was my father. There's no question in my mind about that. I was legitimized, albeit briefly, by..." He paused, realizing how strange it sounded. "By Daenerys Targaryen, when she held the throne for a fleeting moment." Sir Lyle snorted. "That's no official decree recognized by the realm. Besides, that queen is gone. We stand on shaky ground if we rely on her authority." Lady Roseanne crossed her arms, though her expression had softened somewhat. "The important question is whether the Stormlords and the rest of the realm would follow him. Title or not, we need a figure who can unite. Cersei's arrogance has alienated so many. The name Baratheon still means something, at least in the Stormlands. Do you have any proof of your parentage beyond your word and your hair?" "Done," Sissel interjected. "We have certain accounts from those who served in the Red Keep under Robert, individuals who recall visits to your mother's tavern, coupled with Gendry's own recollections and a few discreet inquiries by Master Ormond. It seems quite solid. But there won't be a neatly signed parchment stating Robert acknowledged him. That was never how Robert operated." Lord Ormond lifted a hand, his voice measured. "We must look at the bigger picture. The realm is fracturing. The Queen's debts mount, her brutality deepens. She is rumored to be planning yet another tax increase on the Riverlands, on the Vale, on anyone she can extort. If we don't act, we risk a dozen petty wars or one grand rebellion that will raise the city. Our best chance to restore stability without a bloodbath is to present a name the Lords will accept. We all know how Robert after his rebellion." Sir Martin spoke quietly, arms folded. "With the rightful name or not, the City Watch has no love for Cersei. We believe they can be swayed, a portion of them at least. With enough gold, courtesy of Ormond's hidden coffers, they may lay down arms or switch sides. Once the Watch is out of her control, the Queen loses her grip on King's Landing." "And then what?" Lady Roseanne asked. "We stroll into the Red Keep and place a crown on his head." She gestured at Gendry, who remained silent, bracing himself. "Cersei has cunning and loyal soldiers. She won't go quietly." Edric, standing near the door, spoke with a low certainty. "If we corner her, starve her of allies, she won't have many options. She may try to flee. If she fights, we'll have no choice but to confront her. But it doesn't have to be an all-out assault. Not if enough men in the keep itself turn against her." Cecil inclined her head. Which is why we must do this from within. We have Sir Martin and Lord Ormond on the small council, plus me in the shadows. We can orchestrate a time when the Queen is vulnerable, perhaps during a council session or a royal inspection. Then we present Gendry, back him with the watch, and demand her abdication. With no loyal army at her side, she might yield to avoid immediate death. Sir Lyle narrowed his eyes, though he seemed more thoughtful than hostile. I can't deny it's a plausible plan, but we'll need the Stormlands to back him. If they won't, the rest of us look like traitors enthroning a bastard. That doesn't inspire confidence. Do we have men from the Stormlands on our side? Cecil hesitated, then nodded at Martin. The knight cleared his throat. Not as many as we'd like, but there are pockets of discontent. House Wild, House Selmy, maybe even House Penrose. They've all lost relatives in Cersei's wars. They resent her. If Gendry arrives with the city watch behind him, they might rally rather than face Lannister vengeance alone. Lady Roseanne let out a slow breath, turning her gaze to Gendry as though sizing him up for the first time. Well, boy, do you have anything to say? We're about to stake our fortunes, possibly our lives, on this scheme. You'd best speak for yourself. Gendry's mouth went dry but had expected this moment. He stood straighter, summoning whatever confidence he could find. I never wanted a throne, he began, voice low and steady. I've lived most of my life as a blacksmith. I'm not a lord or a knight. But I've seen what the Queen's rule does to ordinary people, taxing them into the dirt, letting them starve, turning their fear into her power. I can fix that by staying silent. If my blood is Baratheon, then let it be used to help, not hurt. He paused, scanning their faces. I won't pretend I'm Robert Reborn, but I want to do what he never did. Actually care for the people who look to the crown for justice. If you have me, I'll do my best to be worthy of the trust you place in me. Woman? Silence filled the room, broken only by the distant crackle of the lantern. Lady Roseanne's gaze flicked away, as though she was considering how genuine he sounded. Sir Lyle pursed his lips. Lord Ormond looked thoughtful, eyes darting between Cecil and Martin. Then, in a quiet voice, Lady Roseanne spoke. You sound sincere enough. This realm has seen too many self-serving kings. Perhaps sincerity is precisely what we need. Sir Lyle gave a short nod. He's untested, but I see no guile in him. Dim. Cecil inclined her head toward Gendry. You see why we believe in him. Now, to the immediate matter, we need your pledge. Will you help us expand this circle, find more loyalists who'd stand with us once we make our move? We plan to act soon. Within weeks, perhaps. The Queen grows more paranoid daily. The Queen grows more paranoid daily. Lord Ormond folded his arms. I will funnel more coin to the watch. Sir Martin can continue feeding us information from within the keep. Lady Roseanne, Sir Lyle, if you know men in your retinues willing to fight, or at least to remain quiet until the time comes, secure them. The moment we signal, they must be ready. Now, Lady Roseanne straightened her shoulders. I have a small force, 24 men at best, but they're loyal. I'll hold them near the Roserad, ready to march on King's Landing if you need reinforcements. Sir Lyle tapped his foot, glancing at Gendry. I'll do the same with what knights I can muster. Enough to keep the Queen's men from overwhelming you if a fight breaks out. But we have to be cautious. If word spreads too soon, the Queen will guess our plan. None. Cecil nodded in agreement. Discretion is paramount. We'll arrange another meeting with a few more houses once we're sure they're safe. For now, only approach those you trust beyond doubt. Any slip could ruin us. They continued discussing the logistics, secret signals, safe routes to the city gate, a planned day when the Gold Cloak's loyalties might be tested. Gendry listened with a mix of awe and dread at the magnitude of what they were orchestrating. This was no mere spat among lords. It was the potential redefinition of the kingdom's leadership. If they succeeded, he would be king. The weight of that thought nearly made his legs quake. Yet he steadied himself, reminding himself that he was here for a reason. The city needed saving. The entire realm needed saving. The meeting lasted well over an hour, the group talking in half-hushed voices around the small table. Gendry occasionally offered input, but mostly he absorbed it all, feeling like a raw recruit among seasoned generals. Even if Lady Roseanne and Sir Lyle had misgivings, they seemed committed to the cause. Lord Ormond, for his part, exuded a subdued resolve. This was a man who'd seen the crown's coffers drain under Cersei's reign, and understood better than anyone how unsustainable her rule had become. Sir Martin remained stoic, but Gendry sensed an undercurrent of guilt or worry. The knight was literally living under Cersei's nose in the Red Keep, playing a risky game of deception. One misstep and the Queen would have his head. At last, Sissel guided them to a tentative conclusion. We'll meet again in a fortnight if possible. Sooner, if the Queen's behavior forces our hand. Meanwhile, Gendry will remain in hiding. We can't risk his face being recognized just yet. Sir Martin, if you sense imminent danger, if the Queen is close to discovering our plot, you must alert us immediately, and we'll act sooner. All agreed. Gendry and Edric escorted them to the door, stepping into the alley to ensure it was clear. The visitors left in pairs, cloaks pulled tight, vanishing into the city's darkness with the hush of conspirators. Lord Ormond went first with Lady Roseanne, each feigning indifference as though they'd simply been out for an evening stroll. Sir Lyle followed soon after. Sir Martin lingered a moment, meeting Gendry's eyes. "May the gods protect you," he said in a low voice. "And us all." Gendry nodded, jaw set. "You too, Sir Martin. I'll be waiting." When Martin disappeared into the gloom, Sissel turned to Gendry and Edric. Her face was carefully calm, but her voice quivered slightly with the strain of her own nerves. "That went about as well as we could expect. No one stormed out in denial. They're with us, for now." She took a measured breath, scanning the alley. "The real challenge lies ahead." Edric nodded grimly. "We'll keep him hidden, but eventually, more will need to see him." Sissel touched Gendry's arm, a hint of warmth in the contact. "You did well. Stay ready. Watch yourself, and trust that we'll guide the bigger movements. We can't let the Queen sniff us out too soon." Gendry tried to offer a small grin. "Thank you. I'll do my part." It's deep. They re-entered the house, and Sissel allowed herself only a brief respite, sipping a cup of water and pressing her forehead as though warding off a headache. "I must go," she said quietly. "There are rumors I need to confirm. The Queen's new captain of the guard is rummaging through old records, possibly looking for evidence of bastard lines. If that surfaces, we'll have no time to spare." Gendry's heart lurched. "Should I move again?" She shook her head. "Not yet. I'll send word if it's necessary. The fewer times you wander the city, the safer. Just be ready for anything." Now Sod Congo. Gendry and Edric walked her to the door. She slipped out as silently as she'd arrived, leaving only the faint swirl of her cloak behind. Once more, the bolts slid into place. Gendry felt a jolt of weariness surge through him. This was only the beginning, but it already felt like a lifetime of scheming. Edric cleared his throat. "Well, that's that. You hungry?" Gendry exhaled, managing a tight smile. "I could eat a horse." They laughed softly, a brief release of tension, then rummaged through the meager stores to find enough for a modest supper. The city outside seemed calmer now, the hush of late night settling in. With the safe house locked and the shutters closed, they carefully lit a single candle to avoid drawing attention. Over a shared bowl of stew, thin but warm, they reflected on the meeting's outcome. "They believe in you," Edric said after a while, stirring the stew. "Well, or they believe in the Baratheon name. Hard to say which." Gendry mulled that over, chewing on a bit of soggy carrot. "For now, I suppose it doesn't matter. If it lets us remove Cersei without another war, that's enough." Edric nodded, though the doubt in his eyes was plain. "Just be prepared, lad. If you take the throne, you'll have to keep their loyalty. That's a whole other battle." Gendry couldn't help but grimace. One step at a time, he finished his stew in silence, the weight of the future pressing down. He tried to picture the day he might walk into the Red Keep as king. The image refused to settle, splintering into anxious visions of conflict and chaos. Still, he clung to the flicker of hope that they could succeed, that the people might see him as something other than another tyrant. Night stretched on. Once again, Edric took the first watch, crossbow in hand, while Gendry tried to sleep on a pallet near the hearth. The city's distant noises occasionally floated through the shutters, a drunken shout, the bark of a dog, the rumble of a passing cart. Each time, Gendry's heart thumped, imagining gold cloaks at the door. But no one came. Slowly, exhaustion won out, and he drifted into uneasy dreams of swords clashing, of voices chanting his father's name, of a distant shadow wearing a lion's crown. Manon. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, the corridors gleamed under the flare of torches. Cersei Lannister paced a private room adjoining her chambers, the echo of her footsteps like a restless heartbeat against the marble floors. She wore a fitted gown of deep crimson, gold trim, accentuating her proud figure, but her face was pinched, eyes glittering with suspicion. A half-empty cup of wine sat on a side table. She occasionally snatched it up for a bitter sip before resuming her pacing. A lone man in partial armor stood before her, a newly appointed captain of the guard, Sir Denton Grey. He had a lean, sharp face and carried himself with rigid formality. Cersei's green eyes bored into him. "You're certain you found nothing in the archives?" Sir Denton dipped his head. "Nothing conclusive, Your Grace. We have incomplete records of Robert's bastards, but the old Master of Whispers likely purged them. We'll keep searching." Cersei's lips curled in displeasure. "I want every trace, every rumor. If a single bastard draws breath in this city, I want him drowned in Blackwater Bay. Understand?" "Beton, Evaster." He bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." She drank again, nearly emptying the cup. "What about the small council? Any sign of dissent?" Sir Denton hesitated. "They grow uneasy, my queen, but none speak openly against you. Sir Martin Moore follows your orders, though he's asked about the gold cloak's deployments, possibly nothing." Cersei sniffed. "Or possibly something. Don't trust any of them. Keep your men vigilant. If you hear so much as a whisper about a rebellion, I want the conspirators flayed." Her voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. Sir Denton bowed again. "It will be done, Your Grace." He excused himself, leaving the queen alone with her suspicions. She stood by the window, gazing out across the black sky and the faint lights of the city. The wind rustled the curtains, bearing the smell of the distant sea. Her thoughts churned. She sensed betrayal in every shadow, felt the sting of resentment from the corners of the realm. Where were those rumors coming from? Did the Baratheon line truly linger in some filthy whelp skulking through the city? She scowled, tossing the remains of her wine onto the floor. If so, she would find him. She would extinguish the last ember of that drunken fool Robert's blood and preserve her crown at any cost. She left the room, crossing into her bedchamber. The corridors outside were empty, the hour late. Guards stationed at intervals stood ramrod straight, terrified of her wrath. She permitted herself a grim smile. Fear was more reliable than loyalty. If she learned that the small council was indeed plotting something, she would make an example of every traitor. That thought steadied her heart, granting her a semblance of cold certainty. The queen would not be deposed again. Settling onto the chaise near her bed, she pressed the tips of her fingers together. How many times had she fought and clawed her way back from certain doom? She'd outlived most of her enemies: Ned Stark, the Tyrells, Daenerys Targaryen. Why should a nameless bastard pose any threat? Yet a persistent unease gnawed at her. She reached for the wine once more, a final drink to calm her nerves, and then beckoned a servant to extinguish the torches. A hush filled the chamber, heavy with the promise of turmoil soon to come. Down to Remain Tower. Across the city, Gendry woke to a faint tapping on the shutters. He startled upright, reaching instinctively for the hammer he kept beside his bedroll. The sky outside showed the first hints of dawn, a sickly blue creeping across the horizon. Edric was already on his feet, crossbow aimed at the window. Another tap. Then a whisper. "It's me." Sissel's voice, subdued but urgent. Edric lowered the crossbow, shot Gendry a wary glance, then unlatched the shutters just enough to peek out. She stood in the alley, hood drawn, her face etched with tension. Edric silently opened the door, and Sissel slipped inside. She was breathing hard, as if she'd run a distance. "What is it?" Gendry asked, alarmed by her pallor. She steadied herself, pressing a hand to her chest. "Trouble. Lord Ormond sent a raven this morning. Sir Denton Grey has begun a sweep of the city. They're searching for any rumored bastards of Robert." Gendry's blood ran cold. "How close are they?" "They haven't come here yet, but it's only a matter of time." She glanced around, as though half expecting soldiers to crash in at any moment. "We must move you. We have another hideaway in the sewers beneath the old sept. It's vile, but safer than a house they might search." Edric muttered a curse under his breath. "How do you know they're not watching the sewers too?" "We have watchers of our own," she replied, "and the gold cloaks rarely venture far into the sewers unless they have a direct lead. We'll keep an eye out. But we can't stay here." Gendry nodded, pulling on his boots, gathering his few belongings. "When do we leave?" Sissel wiped sweat from her brow. "Now. The sweeps start in the outer wards and circle inward. We have a small window to slip away." They acted quickly. Edric doused the hearth with water, smothering any trace of embers. Gendry tossed his bedroll into a sack. Sissel peered through a crack in the shutters, scanning the alley for signs of movement. At her nod, they slipped out the door and into the chilled morning air, careful to keep the door unlocked so it wouldn't appear suspicious. The alley was empty. She waved them on, leading them along a circuit of side streets that Gendry had never traversed before. They passed crumbling walls and small courtyards strewn with rubbish. Once, Sissel halted abruptly, flattening herself against the wall. Edric and Gendry followed suit. Footsteps approached. A pair of city watchmen, discussing the rumored presence of a Baratheon brat. Gendry's heart pounded. They were mere feet away. He forced himself to remain utterly still as the gold cloaks paused to adjust their equipment. Then they moved on, their voices drifting around a corner. Sissel exhaled softly, motioning them onward. They navigated twisting alleys for what felt like an eternity. The rising sun brightened the streets, but they stuck to the narrowest lanes, hidden from direct sight. They crossed a small footbridge over a murky canal, the water below rank with sewage. Gendry noted that even in the morning, the city's gloom did not lift. People glowered from behind shutters or hurried past, heads low, anxious to avoid the watch scrutiny. At last, Sissel led them to a stone archway partially hidden by sagging wooden scaffolding. Edric helped pry open a grated door, revealing a dank tunnel that sloped downward. The stench of rotting waste hit them like a blow. Gendry gagged, covering his nose with an arm, but followed as Sissel descended the steps into darkness. They lit a single torch. The walls glistened with slimy moisture, and the floor was slick. The sewer branched in multiple directions, channels of filthy water coursing through the center. The gloom swallowed their torchlight within a few paces. Gendry could hardly believe this was where they would hide. Yet any gold cloak who ventured in would need a strong stomach. A muffled scuffle made Gendry freeze, but then a figure emerged from the shadows, hooded, a torch in hand. It was a woman of about Sissel's height. She nodded in recognition. Sissel spoke softly. "Ilya, it's me." Ilya stepped closer, revealing a scar that ran across her jaw. She wore rough spun clothing and carried a short spear. "You're just in time. We've seen patrols on the street above." Her gaze flicked to Gendry. "So this is him?" Sissel nodded. "Yes, we need him kept hidden until the search passes." Ilya regarded him briefly, then jerked her head in the direction of a small ledge. "We have a space set up deeper in. It's not comfortable, but it'll do. Follow me." They trudged along the edge of the sewer, trying not to slip on the slimy stones. The smell was overpowering. Gendry's eyes watered. Edric coughed once, grimacing. Sissel's face remained set in stony determination. The roar of rushing water echoed in the narrow corridors, mixing with the skitter of unseen rats. Once, Gendry spotted something large moving in the shadows. A cluster of rats, or maybe a cat. He couldn't tell. They pressed on, stepping over rotted planks and debris. Ilya led them through a gap in the wall, into a disused side tunnel. The water here barely trickled, leaving a relatively dry patch of ground. She lifted her torch, revealing a cramped alcove, maybe once used for storing maintenance tools. A small pile of burlap sacks served as seating. The ceiling dripped steadily, forming a grimy puddle at one end. "This is it," Elia said. "We keep watch at certain exit points. You'll be safe from random patrols as long as they don't have a reason to suspect you're down here." Edric let out a slow breath. "It's better than being dragged off by the Queen's man." Gendry set his sack down, the smell making him grimace. "I guess we'll manage." Sissel handed the torch to Elia. "I'll check in as often as I can. We'll bring food, water, anything else you need. Just stay here until we say it's clear." She looked at Gendry with an apologetic glimmer in her eyes. "I'm sorry it's come to this, but until we can guarantee your safety, it's best to remain hidden." Gendry nodded. "I understand." He tried not to sound too miserable, but the reality of living in a sewer made his stomach churn. Still, it was preferable to a cell in the Red Keep, or the headsman's block. Elia set the torch in a makeshift sconce on the wall, illuminating the alcove. "I'll be just around the bend if you need me," she said. "No one gets in without passing me first." Sissel exhaled, turning to Gendry. "We'll keep working the plan. The search won't last forever. Cersei's resources are spread thin. Once they tire of looking, or once we find a chance to remove her, we'll get you out." She lowered her voice. "I know it feels dire, but keep faith." Gendry gave a tight nod. "I will." He paused, then added softly, "Thank you." She pressed a hand briefly to his shoulder. Then she and Edric moved back down the tunnel, leaving him with Elia in the flickering torchlight. He listened as their footsteps faded into the echoing darkness. A dull ache settled in his chest. This was his new refuge? Surrounded by filth and stale air. He rubbed the back of his neck, trying not to dwell on it. If everything depended on his survival, then a sewer would have to do. He sank onto one of the burlap sacks, setting his hammer beside him. The dripping water formed an irregular percussion that only underlined how alone he felt. Elia busied herself checking a rickety crate that held supplies. Some flasks of water, dried meat, a crust of bread wrapped in cloth. She offered him a piece of jerky and a skin of water, which he accepted gratefully. "Down here," she said in a quietly sympathetic tone. "It's best not to think about how it smells. Focus on the days ahead." He chewed the tough jerky, swallowing with difficulty. "Do you believe in all this? That we can oust the Queen?" Elia paused, her scar flexing as she frowned. "I believe Cersei's time is done. She's burned too many bridges, shed too much blood. Whether you're the true Baratheon heir or not, people want hope. If that hope has black hair and a good heart, so be it." Mek'Ra'el? Gendry felt a surge of gratitude at her candor. "I appreciate that. I'm trying to be worthy of it." She gave a slight nod. "Get some rest. Sissel will come soon enough." With that, she retreated a few steps, leaning against the tunnel wall, spear in hand. Her posture told him she'd stand guard for as long as needed. Gendry slumped against the damp stone, the smell acrid in his nostrils, the swirling sense of displacement clenching his gut. Yet amidst the misery, a small spark of determination burned brighter than ever. If Cersei was so terrified of him that she scoured the city, then the threat he posed was real. If she insisted on driving him into the sewers to survive, he would endure it. And when the time came to emerge, he would do so with a hammer in hand and a cause worth fighting for. He let the weariness overtake him, eyes sliding shut. The drip of water became a perverse lullaby, echoing down the ancient tunnels. Somewhere above, the city bustled, unaware that a momentous change was fermenting in the shadows. In the darkness of the sewer, Gendry Baratheon, bastard, blacksmith, reluctant heir, prepared to endure whatever trials lay ahead, clinging to the fragile hope that soon enough he would help cast off the yoke of a cruel queen and forge a realm where no one had to cower in filthy tunnels to survive. Time crawled. He drifted in and out of a fitful doze, roused occasionally by Elia pacing or by the distant squeak of rats. Each time he woke, his muscles ached and the stench of the place clung to his nostrils. He thought about Arya, wondered where she was. If she knew what he was doing, she might scoff or encourage him, or both. He remembered Davos, who had once risked everything to help him escape the Red Woman's designs. Did Davos still live? Somewhere in the north or across the narrow sea? Perhaps one day Gendry might find him again, show him that his efforts hadn't been in vain. The swirl of memories blended into the oppressive gloom of the sewer. At one point, Elia shook him gently. "Eat," she murmured. She handed him a small chunk of bread and a sip of stale water. Gendry blinked, forcing himself to take a few bites, though the dryness stuck in his throat. Above them, the city likely bustled with midday traffic, but down here, time was meaningless. He couldn't tell how many hours had passed. The single torch had burnt low, replaced by another. Elia maintained a steady watch, sometimes vanishing for short intervals to scout the tunnels. Each time she returned quietly, nodding to him that all was safe. When he managed to speak in a quiet lull, he asked, "How long have you helped Sissel?" Elia shrugged. "A couple years. Before that I ran messages for Qburn and the Old City Watch. But I saw how everything rotted under Cersei. I'd rather be on the side of something new." Gendry could only nod. He understood that impetus well. They fell silent again. Exhaustion crept back. The steady drip and the flicker of torchlight lulled him. He wondered if, in the future, when songs might be sung about this rebellion, anyone would mention the rank sewer where a king in the making hid from a paranoid queen. The thought was almost funny in a grim way. At last, he gave himself over to a dozing half-sleep, trusting Elias' vigilance. In that uneasy slumber, he dreamed again of the Iron Throne. This time, instead of forging it anew, he found himself hammering away at the swords that made up its back, reshaping them into something softer, less threatening. A voice, maybe his father's, or maybe someone else, whispered that a king must carry steel, but not let steel carry him. He woke with a shudder, uncertain whether the words were wise or nonsensical. Elia was still there, still watchful, and the gloom continued. Hours later, or maybe it was only minutes, a shuffle in the corridor snapped his eyes open. Elia tensed, raising her spear. Then a familiar voice hissed, "It's me. Let me through." Sissel again, accompanied by Edric. Gendry sat up, heart jumping. Sissel stepped into the alcove, lowering her hood. Relief etched on her face. They finished the sweeps in the outer wards. It was thorough, but they didn't come near here. "For now, you're safe." Gendry nodded, rising unsteadily on cramped legs. "How long do I have to stay?" She exchanged a look with Edric. "A few more days, perhaps." "We'll keep watching." The city is simmering. Fewer people on the streets, more gold cloaks. But Sir Martin says the Queen has found no solid lead. She's lashing out though, threatening to raise taxes again. Then Edric frowned. "She's going to spark a riot if she does." "That's the fear," Sissel agreed. "If the city revolts violently, we lose control. We can't let that happen before we're ready. We need a quick, decisive shift, not another slaughter." Gendry let out a ragged breath. Another few days in the sewer seemed torturous, but it was necessary. "All right, I'll endure it." "No." She offered him a small package wrapped in cloth. Inside lay a fresh water skin, some dried fruit, and a folded piece of flatbread. He ate better than that moldy bread and jerky. "We can't have you wasting away." Her tone held a note of empathy that made him smile in spite of everything. Edric studied Gendry, then patted him on the shoulder. "Stay strong. I'll be back soon with more supplies." Gendry tried to convey his gratitude with a nod. He wanted to say more, to express how their efforts kept him sane, how each visit reminded him why this mattered. But his throat felt tight. Instead, he merely murmured, "Thank you," and looked away, embarrassed by the sudden sting in his eyes. Elia stepped aside to let them pass. Sissel lingered a moment, lowering her voice so only Gendry could hear. "I know it's awful here, but hold on. We'll get you out as soon as we can. The plan is in motion. More lords are coming to our side every day. We have a real chance." He mustered a shaky smile. I'll be ready. She squeezed his arm in farewell, then slipped away with Edric, disappearing down the tunnel in the torch's glow. Elia resumed her vigil, and Gendry sank onto the burlap again, unwrapping the food with careful hands. He took measured bites, the taste of the fruit reminding him of simpler joys. At least Sissel brought a spark of hope with each visit. He savored that feeling, letting it fill his chest. If the city grew ever more tense, they might need to strike sooner rather than later. He braced himself for the possibility that his next move might come at any moment. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of dripping water lull him once more. If his father's blood truly flowed in his veins, then he would find the strength to endure. And when the time came to stand before the realm, he would hammer out a better future than the twisted fate that had befallen them under Cersei's rule. The tunnels echoed with each droplet falling, like a countdown to a moment when the realm's destiny would hinge on a blacksmith's courage and the forging of a new reign.